Okay. You see it now?
Yes.
You see it now?
I see it now.
Okay.
Well, what you see, I think, when you have a relationship with a child, your own child in particular, because you can see them most clearly in some real sense, is that you see the manifestation of the image of God.
It's not something you treat lightly. It's not something that isn't miraculous. If you take children seriously, and if you take the task of creating a world in which little human beings can turn into healthy, whole, responsible, good adults who can live full-rounded, satisfying lives that are not just good for themselves, but good for the other people around them. You know, that's, again, I have to turn to the sacred language, like this is a sacred task. And to see people so willfully tell small children lies, I feel livid at these people, really livid.
Yeah, I
Preach.
feel exactly the same. Well, hence my banning from Twitter, let's say.
Oh, Jordan. Jordan is really married to this classic intellectual image he's got going, isn't he?
Yeah. Yes. Well, hey, you know, be who you are, but you know,
I guess.
in the correct sense, I guess.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, I don't know. I like him. I just think he could have a little bit more flair to him, you know. But maybe it's good that he's this. Maybe it is good that he's like this more placid milquetoast personality, so that people take him as seriously as possible. Because the things he says are very serious. The things he says. The things he says.
Hello, everyone. I'm here today with author and journalist Helen Joyce. Her first book, Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality, was a Times of London bestseller in 2021. She is a longtime staff journalist at The Economist.
Yo, Panda, what's up, bro? Good to see you.
Hello. Welcome to the chat.
As you can see by the stream name, we're getting into a dicey subject today. But we're doing okay, man. How are you doing? I hope you're having a great day.
We are good. How are you?
Where she has held various senior positions, including Britain editor, international editor, and finance editor. She is currently on leave of absence from The Economist to work with Sex Matters, a new human rights organization campaigning for sex-based rights. Thank you very much for agreeing to speak with me, Helen. I've been reading your book over the last...
Yeah, I myself am pretty beat. I went to the gym yesterday, did chest day, and then I went straight from the gym to a Muay Thai lesson. And man, I'm just sore.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
couple of days and found it, what would you call it, unfortunately compelling. That might be the right term. And this issue of the transsexual rights and all of the furor and upheaval around them seems in some odd way key to the malaise that is central to our times. And so people have asked me, like they've asked you, why I've bothered dealing with it at all, since it hypothetically doesn't affect me personally. But maybe we can start with that, because at the beginning of your book, you pointed out that, well, writing this wasn't exactly good for your reputation, let's say. Certainly exposed you to the mad affections of the mob, let's say. But on the other hand, as we noted in your biography, you are a journalist after all. So maybe we could start with your thoughts on why this book was necessary and timely.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. It's really kind of you to talk to me about it. And I think, unfortunately, compelling is perhaps the best two-word description of my book I've heard yet. So why did I write it? I mean, I've been a journalist now for approaching 20 years, and I think a short description would be somebody who runs towards the burning building rather than away from it. So when you see something that's crazy, compelling, a moving story, big news, you shouldn't say, oh, this is going to be trouble, this is going to be difficult to write about. You should go, ooh, tell me more. And then when you start to...
I'm quite large. I live in a small town, and a lot of people I grew up with that would tease me about my size. Well, look, man, you're all adults now, and if those are the kind of people that would still give you shit, then you should let that motivate you. If they're the kinds of people who would still tease you for being heavy as adults, those people are not worth your thought. They are not worth your attention. They are shallow and vapid and immature. So you should just go to the gym with a mindset of, if these people say anything negative, if they think anything negative, that's just proof that I shouldn't be caring what they think, because I'm in here doing the work I need to be doing. And that should be respected. And it should be respected. I have immense respect for someone who's willing to admit, I have a problem, I'm going to go to the gym and fix it. And remember, besides going to the gym too, when you're talking about weight loss, calories in, calories out. If you're not in a caloric deficit, you will not lose weight. And you cannot go to the gym to work your way out of a caloric surplus. Don't think that you can train out of a caloric. If you're eating 500 extra calories every day, you're not going to work out enough to burn that off. So yeah, man, just focus on keeping your diet at I would recommend 1,800 calories, unless you're a really small guy, in which case you'd need to eat even fewer than that every day. But I'm just assuming you're in the 5'10" to 6 foot range like most men. Yeah, man, just keep grinding. We're always here if you need to come into chat, or if you need to come into Discord, ask for advice, just vent, need some support. We're here.
Interview people and you get reactions of the sort that you've never had before. And for your listeners, I've been a foreign correspondent. I've worked in Brazil. I've written about paedophilia. I've written about the effects of pornography on teenagers' brains. I've interviewed murderers. I've interviewed presidents. And never before have I had the reaction that I had for this.
Yeah, well, that's also why I thought that opening with that background was so relevant, because you have this immense experience as a journalist and you've covered all sorts of controversial issues, and yet you haven't been exposed to the kind of vitriol that this book attracted. And so I guess there's two questions about that. One is, why in the world would this be such a hot button issue, but also a hot button issue associated with that kind of mobbing and vitriol? And what technological transformations, say social media related, do you think might be also contributing to the fact that someone like you can be targeted so effectively for communicating now?
Yeah, two really good questions. I think that one of the reasons that the vitriol is so intense on this subject is that it's so linguistic. When you say that men can become women by saying that they're women, or vice versa, you're making a statement about language, not about reality. And in the postmodernist turn is precisely that turn in which the language takes precedence over the bedrock material itness of things. And so when somebody like me insists on talking about the reality that they see and refuses to use the words that are mandated, we're destroying the reality that people are trying to create. And since they see the reality that they're trying to create as something that is socially just, that they're trying to bring about a new Jerusalem, someone like me is doing a very bad thing and should be silenced by any means necessary, including by lying about me, or threatening me, or trying to get me out of my job, and so on. And then your second question was about social media. So why now? And I think there's a lot of reasons. It's a sort of perfect storm thing. But we are witnessing a social contagion, and that social contagion is carrying what I increasingly think of as a new religion, a neo-religion.
Yes.
And it wouldn't be able to spread without social media. And not just because social media is now in everybody's pockets, but because of specifics about social media, in particular, the censorship role that Silicon Valley firms take upon themselves. So I can't speak using the words that I regard as natural. If I do, I'll just lose my Twitter account straight away. I have to think about everything.
I wouldn't know about such things.
Sure you wouldn't. Sure you wouldn't, Peter. Excuse me, Jordan. His last name is Peterson. But you know, and something she didn't touch on, but something that has to be mentioned alongside all that stuff about social media is the algorithms. It's not just that the stuff is sort of naturally taking hold and blossoming. It's not just that it's a social contagion. It's that the social media outlets are actively pushing this insanity. That cannot be understated. The people holding the control panel at their fingertips, those people are pushing it. It never would have gotten this far because it's, well, for example, the Twitter bot situation, okay? It's currently estimated that, like, I think the whistleblower said something like 40% of the platform is bots. And we'll just go with about 90% of those bots are all left-wing bots, which means you have 40% of the platform being hyper vocal on a set of issues, many of which involve the LGBTQ gender theory whole platform. And these algorithms are fed into by these bots. So you force the entire website to look like an echo chamber of this garbage. Then legacy media, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, all these legacy media outlets use Twitter as a news source. So they think all of this shit is really what's relevant and going on, or at least they're pretending that it is.
Yeah.
Because they either don't know about the bots, or the much more likely scenario, they know about the bots but they don't care because they're in on it too. So it cannot be understated that it cannot be under or overstated. We have to focus on this, that the people holding the keys to the power in terms of the social media outlets are largely responsible for this. I mean, it's and like, it was bad with Facebook and Twitter, and TikTok is those two combined on steroids, because the Chinese Communist government is literally nothing confirms to me that gender ideology and the LGBTQ ideology are absolutely terrible for society, like the fact that it's one of the main things that TikTok pushes to youth, and the Chinese Communist government's overt stated goal is to destroy the West. What more confirmation do you need that this shit is absolutely terrible for people? It's literally right in front of you. Right in front of you.
Well, I mean, and you can tell that too by the way that they tailor the site completely differently to all of their people.
Right.
Because it actually shows, them doing things that are productive, and
they're people, meaning their own
physically
citizens,
fit and all that other stuff.
Well, and see, the algorithm of TikTok is designed for the audience that it's being aimed at. It's a very advanced algorithm. And you're right. In China, it shows people being productive, learning new skills, being physically fit, performing well in traditional roles, achieving traditional markers of success. And in the West, we see 12-year-olds dancing like go-go dancers. I'll just put it politely.
Right.
And we see adult men in makeup with a full-ass fucking beard claiming to be a woman, telling kids that they can email them if they're feeling gender confused.
Yeah.
Groomer! All right.
Things.
Yes, I know you wouldn't. Well, yeah, you have to be very careful. You have to use their language, because that's the language now of Silicon Valley. And so it's very hard to say what I want to say using their language.
Okay, so now you dived into the deepest part of this right off the bat. So I think we'll talk
really
about
sucky.
the idea that this is.
What's really sucky, Kate?
Because that whole them tailoring things to make you have to use their language,
Mm-hmm.
that straight up is one of the markers of like narcissistic abusive relationships,
Yes.
is having to
Yep.
tailor your speech specifically, so that you don't anger the person.
Yep. As someone who was best friends with a full-blown narcissist for like 10 years, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the so it varies narcissist to narcissist. Some of them will get angry, some of them will just manipulate the conversation until you're speaking the way you want them to. But
Yeah.
the end result is always you speak the way that they want you to, or else
Mhm.
you're punished in some way. And I mean, in we know what happens on social media. If you don't comply with their censorship, they boot you off their platform.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, all right,
And
guys, are you a publisher or a platform? Come on now.
right.
God,
Which is
constant
something
this.
that people need to look out for, because you do that too long, you will actually rewire your mind to start speaking that way. And that in itself, making compromises like that, is a foot in the door.
Mm-hmm. That's why fighting against censorship is so important. That's why these free speech platforms like Truth Social, Getter, there's a few other ones, but any platform that's not actively censoring you for saying things that are obvious, like
Mhm.
if you're a guy, you can't become a woman.
Right.
It's genetically, biologically, physically impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. Molecular geneticists say so.
Any of them that have balls, yeah.
Yeah.
Except
Well,
except
I was making reference to.
to that one lady on stage that I can't.
Yeah.
I wish I could remember what video that was where I saw that video. But
I
yeah,
think it was one of Amala's videos.
yeah, yeah. The young lady from PragerU. Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah, we might pull that up here. But yep.
As a linguistic battle, and then we'll turn back to the technological front. So, one of the things that I've been trying to think through, because I think we will go right down to the.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, Sir Leviticus. That really doesn't.
Yeah.
But at some point you got to put your foot down and just take the risk. And I don't care if it does get me banned from Twitch. I
Yeah.
won't comply. I will not comply. Period.
Yep.
If I get banned from Twitch, which by the way, if you guys either join the Discord or go and follow the Twitter, so that if we do get banned for any reason, you can follow us and find out what's going on. The Discord, the Twitch. We also have YouTube. Follow us on at least one other platform, so that if you lose us here, you can find out where we're gonna go, what our next steps are, and just make it easier for us to get a hold of you. The Discord probably is the best way.
Yeah.
So yeah, we appreciate
We're
you.
active in there all the time.
Yep, we are definitely pretty active in the Discord. That is for sure.
Weeds in this to begin with, is what seems to me to be the postmodern anti-enlightenment and anti-Judeo-Christian insistence that epistemology, which is the model of reality, let's say, that we use to guide ourselves, trumps ontology, which is reality itself. And so the postmodernists insisted that the meaning of words could only be adjudicated in relationship to other words. And so they thought of the whole linguistic corpus as something like a massive dictionary where every word only bore meaning in relationship to other words, and really did attempt to deny or downplay the idea that there was an external transcendent reality, deistic or objective, that could serve as a corrective to these epistemological propositions. And I think that was driven in part by the underlying Marxist insistence that, let's say, power rules everything, but also that human beings are infinitely malleable, and because of that can be molded and should be molded in the view of whoever happens to hold the utopian reins, let's say, and all of that's tangled together. And
All I would suggest is that you guys have backup plans. Oh, I have a Rumble. Every video I upload to YouTube, it gets backed up on all of our channels. So yeah, we have Adventurous Publications Rumble. If you're feeling adventurous, Rumble. Zach Pieper Rumble. Wildest Kate Rumble. Where our entire video platform is backed up on Rumble. There are, and actually Zach Pieper has an Odyssey. I've been thinking about making an Odyssey for the other ones too. There are multiple that are in the process of being built up. That's what I would highlight, because eventually a lot of the people they ban just get anointed will go to those platforms instead. Right. Yeah. I'm frankly, I'm really thinking that eventually we're going to be primarily on Rumble, because it's only a matter of time.
Right.
They're cracking down, and they're just going to keep tight. Gosh,
You're just going to keep tightening the screw.
And what they don't realize is the more they tighten the screw, the faster they're going to dissolve. I mean, you look at what happened to MySpace.
Yeah.
That exact same thing is going to happen to YouTube. It's going to happen to Twitch. It's going to happen to Twitter. It's going to happen to Facebook. And the more they censor, the more they make the platform restrictive to actual free speech, they're just going to accelerate the rate at which they fall into complete obscurity. Same thing with Tumblr. Tumblr became an echo chamber of far left, ultra insane types, and it went from being like insanely popular for like a year or two to being a graveyard. There's like 10,000 people that use it daily, maybe.
Yeah, because they even got bigger than Reddit, which, I mean, is that really an accomplishment? But I mean,
God, the fucking cesspool of pseudo intellectualism that is Reddit. I could go on and on. It's only a matter of time, which is fine. If these companies wish to go that direction, that's fine. It will destroy themselves and be nice, or be a niche community as Rumble and these other platforms expand outwards. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Places like Rumble, where free speech is actually allowed, are inevitably going to overtake places like, I mean, look at 4chan. Look at 4chan. Mm-hmm. 4chan has been a bastion of free speech since its inception, even amidst immense social pressure from the media outlets, from government, from other parts of the internet. 4chan has been bullied and bullied and bullied, and they have not submitted, and their user base has only grown. You do not hear, there's never been a mass exodus from 4chan, because the people that use 4chan know that they can go there and be themselves. And so any other platform that offers that is inevitably only going to grow in this day and age. So, the fact that YouTube is doing what it's doing, I mean, there's already major creators who are constantly bitching about it. The best part about Rumble is they allow you to be wrong, and they allow you to post your video and let other people decide, and some people might agree, and at least they have the decision. As you have that will come into play, a lot of these companies. Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting too is Gen Z is projected to be one of the most conservative generations in like the last 5, I think. Like within a long time now, they're projected to be extremely conservative. So when they're you know, starting to really come up, like 18 through 25, let's say, and they realize just how crazy YouTube is. I mean, most of Gen Z is already on TikTok instead of YouTube. And there is a conservative side of TikTok. TikTok just kind of uses the algorithm to isolate it and contain it as much as possible. But there is a conservative side to TikTok. And so the resistance movement, the counterculture movement of classical values, classical conservatism, classical liberalism, which is completely detached from modern liberalism, that counter movement already exists. And it's going to take literal military force to stomp it out, and we'll just see if the totalitarian left actually tries to go that far. I don't think they'll like what happens if they actually try that.
Yeah.
You also called this a neo-religion, and so that's why I'm bringing up all these additional factors, because I think they play into this what's become a religious battle, essentially. And we should also talk about why you and I have both concluded, apparently, that this is best construed as a religious battle.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with every word that you say. And in particular, I would say that the reason that this battle is being fought on women's bodies, particularly, because if you want to say that sex isn't real and what people say about themselves is real, like formally that's symmetric. That should affect everybody. But actually, it affects women because women's bodies are more exigent than men's.
Thank you very much, Mom.
So we're the ones who carry the babies, basically. And I think that means that a large share of all women hit the bedrock reality of this is how we make new human beings. And it's easier for men to ignore that fact, easier for men to think of themselves as a ghost in a machine, or as a little homunculus being carried around by a meat puppet, as someone who could become immortal, as someone who could, cut the fleshly bonds, or that, we could start doing womb transplants, all these things. Like, if you've had that experience of growing another human being and then having to get it out of you, you're just much less amenable, shall we say, to these sorts of illusions. And so here in Britain, one of the major sites of resistance to all of this is Mumsnet, which has this reputation as being a site where you talk about, what are the best diapers to buy, or what's the best formula, or, is my husband being a jerk, or whatever. But actually, it's also where women talk about this movement to turn the word woman into something that just means a feeling that can be in a man's head.
Okay, so a couple of ideas about that. Three of them, I guess, three ideas. The first...
Really quick before Jordan here, I just want to point out the fact, too, that this whole thing, the reason at its fundamental root, the reason that the left's attempt to redefine woman is so meaningless and so empty. A woman is someone who identifies as a woman. First of all, circular definition inherently invalid right out the gate, but also, how can you identify as something without knowing what that thing is? And if you say, well, being a woman is a feeling, I feel like a woman, what is that?
Right.
It's this fundamental question that was asked by Matt Walsh in his documentary, which I haven't seen, but I probably should. But I mean, I'm very up to date on the issue anyways, so. But my point is, this idea that we can impose our feelings upon material reality. It is so inherently counterintuitive and so inherently counterproductive to everything that human society has built over the last 20, 30, 40,000 years. It's like, why are you so insistent on destroying the very bedrock of the human mind? Why are you so willing to just jump down this rabbit hole of unraveling the very foundations of human psyche? Do you have any idea where this leads? No, you don't. Because you're a shallow, vapid, banal idiot with no life experience, no wisdom, and you don't care about anything except your own pathetic little feelings.
Yeah, but also I would like to say the reason for this is really, it's a very sinister one if you just boil all of this down to the essentials of what the motivations behind this is. If you can erase woman and get people turned against the idea of, hey, they produce life and make more humans, also encouraging the whole kill your babies movement, you can stop people from producing more human life.
Right.
And I know that this sounds crazy, but whether you look at it from a religious or a realist, or realist standpoint, that's what the end result of this is. That is the motivation behind this. They want to end humans, period.
Well, I don't know about end, but certainly reduce drastically. And again, that's not even up for debate. It's not even conspiracy theory. Bill Gates has openly talked about how he wants to use vaccines to reduce population. The World Economic Forum constantly goes on about how we're overpopulated and we need to take steps to decrease population. It's not a conspiracy theory, people. They want less humans. They look at humanity as a disease.
Yeah.
Now, whatever you want, whatever motivation you want to assign to that, the fact that that's how they view humans is not up for debate. Their motivation and exact worldview, we can debate that all day long. I personally think they're possessed by demons.
Well,
You
yeah.
might think that they're just assholes. Whatever the root reason for their behavior and their outlook on the world is, we have to agree on the fact that they said what they said because they fucking said it. And if you can't agree with me that they said it and we need to take steps to stop them, well, then you're helping them. And now you are also my enemy. And sorry, that's just how it is. It's just how it is. At this point, we don't have time. We don't have time or the luxury of not being on one side. You are either, the world is black and white right now. You are either helping fight the people that want to exterminate humanity. You are helping fight against the people that want one world government. Or you're helping them. You got to choose.
Is that my understanding of the anthropological literature in relationship to initiation rituals in anachronistic tribal communities, let's say, or primordial tribal communities, is that the initiation rituals for men are more severe generally than those for women. And one of the hypotheses about that is that, well, women run smack into biological reality, not least in the form of menstruation, but then definitely in the form of pregnancy and childbirth. And so they get initiated into the actuality of ontology, the bedrock reality, by nature, whereas that has to be done culturally with men. And then the next thing is you said that women have to contend with biological reality in a way that men don't because of that. And that might be true, especially once a woman has been pregnant and had a child, which tends to grow people up in a very radical way. But it is also markedly the case that the people affected by this gender dysphoria epidemic happen to be young women and not young boys. And so that's something that we could talk about. And
well, I don't. So I have to. Two things. One, what he said there about having a child tends to grow people up. That's coming from someone with a PhD, one of the most cited professors ever. Okay, so that opinion is 100% valid. It's as close to fact as an opinion can get. Okay? Now consider how hard the left is pushing for abortion. Shout your abortion. It went from safe, legal, and rare to shout your abortion to people literally screaming in the face of pro-life demonstrators, I love killing kids. Okay?
Right.
There is a push by the political left to infantilize adults, to make people as stupid and emotional and volatile as possible, because it's easier to marionette them. And if you think that anything else is going on over on the left, you're not paying attention. And the other point,
children are easier to manipulate.
exactly. And the other thing, I have to disagree with Jordan that it's primarily that this trans ideology is primarily attacking young women. A lot of young boys are getting caught up in it as well. I mean, it's at least it's there might be 55-45, it might even be 60-40, but it is not, massively on one side, not so much on the other. Just as many young boys are getting caught up in it. And that is the continued and concerted effort of the political left to neuter the Western men in every sense of the word. Make them completely ineffectual, make them completely unable to lead, make them completely incapable of guiding society away from the cliff. Because the people in control want to be in control. And they know that if we have strong men at the grassroots level, they will not have control.
Because if you can get rid of the men, then you can completely erase the women, and all you have left are just children.
Yep. And again, they're trying to increase and increase and increase the age at which people are still children. And considering the number of 30 and 40-year-olds I've met who are still fucking children, shit,
Yeah.
I met one just the other day. I fucking, a guy was yelling at me for no good fucking reason. And I just, it amazed me. This guy was irate over something that was completely, no one was harmed, no property destroyed. Literally nothing bad happened, and this guy's just blowing up at me.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while, Dark
Hello.
Shadow. I can't say I remember much about you, but I do remember you've been in here before. How's it going today?
In a minute. Hello.
But yeah, just the fact that the average person has become so emotionally immature and so incapable of rational thought.
Yeah.
It's very concerning.
Well, maybe we'll just leave it at that for the time being. Sorry. The last thing was, you said that it's the reality of feminine existence that seems to be the place where this religious battleground is taking place, and then you tied the notion of reality to the necessity of reproduction. And that's actually a really good definition of what constitutes reality, and that is relevant to some of the facts that you laid out in your book. So, for example, one of the facts is these are biological and evolutionary facts.
Thank UC Hope. Oh man, that's a good name. I love that name, UC Hope. Thank you very much for the
Yes.
follow. We do politics streams on Saturday, over on YouTube. On Wednesdays, we do kind of general have fun reaction stream, and a lot of what we do a lot of training, fitness, or here on the Twitch as well. So thank you very much for the follow. Welcome in.
Yes.
Hope you're having a great day.
Welcome in.
That sex emerged 1.2 billion years ago. And so that's an awful long time ago. It's way before trees. It's way before many of the things that we regard as fundamental cardinal elements of reality. The brain evolved 500 million years ago, and the cerebrum 200 million years ago. And what this means is that by the time we developed a central nervous system and were able to conceptualize at all, cognitively speaking, sex had been a biological reality for several 100 million years. And one of the things that bothered me about the compelled speech legislation in Canada that mandated that people use the pronouns of other people's choice was that I thought two things. I thought, number one, that was an assault on what might be the most fundamental perceptual category in the human cognitive lexicon and perceptual universe, that the entire way we envision reality has a sex-oriented underlying symbolic structure. And one of the consequences of introducing this mandated primacy of subjective identity would be the destruction of our ability to communicate, and also the dissemination of a tremendous amount of confusion among impressionable young people. So I figured when the pronoun laws first came to existence that we would produce a psychogenic epidemic, which is exactly what happened, and that it would particularly affect young women, because that's where psychogenic epidemics tend to originate if you look at the historical data. And that confusion, psychogenic epidemic, and inability to communicate has stemmed precisely from this deep philosophical view.
Thank you very much for the follow. Anubis T Games. Nice, Anubis. Thank you very much for the follow. We're Team Adventurous. We do a lot of this. We do this on Saturdays, excuse me. But I also, Adventurous Publications YouTube is dedicated to politics now. And we do a lot of fitness streams. I'm a fitness streamer primarily, I'd say. But yeah, the politics channel is over on YouTube if you want a more daily dose of that. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the follow. Welcome to the adventure. Oh, and there's a Discord. Yeah, so if you want to just be able to interact with us daily, there's a Discord.
There it is. Let me shout you out here.
Sense, even theological move. Now, does any of that seem to you to be stating the case too seriously?
No, not at all. I would completely agree with everything that you said there. So I would say about the psychic epidemic that's playing out in teenage girls. We do see psychic epidemics in teenage girls first or worst. They're the people who become anorexic. They're the people who self-harm. They're the people who went through these hysterical laughing episodes and so on, if you could look back historically speaking. I don't think anyone knows exactly why.
Hey, Caitlin,
Yeah.
we haven't replaced the Discord link yet. Can you drop the updated link
Yes,
in the chat, please?
I can.
Thank you.
But it's an observable fact at this point. But also...
I know why.
Oh, you know
I
why?
can tell you why.
Yeah, go
Well,
on.
I know some of why. Well, look, when boys and girls are given personality tests before they hit puberty, there's not a lot of difference in average level of negative emotion experienced. But as soon as girls hit puberty, their proclivity to experience negative emotion, so that's shame and guilt and disappointment and fear and depression, is elevated markedly in contrast to men. And it's permanently transformed at puberty, and it stays stable for the rest of women's lives. And so women reliably experience more negative emotion than men on average. Now, there's wide individual difference, and there's some men who experience more negative emotion than women, but we're talking about... And what that
Aggregate
means,
sample.
at least in part, is that the people, almost all the people who experience the highest levels of negative emotion, and that would include self-consciousness and shame, are female. And that kicks in at puberty. And
That's
so
really
then
interesting.
at puberty too, kids have to restructure their identities in quite a major way. And that's especially true for girls because they have, first of all, it happens to them earlier, right? So they're less mature when nature comes calling, let's say. Plus, as soon as puberty kicks in, they have these elevated levels of negative emotion. And one of the things we know, this is so interesting as far as I'm concerned, is that if terms that are reminiscent of self-consciousness load almost perfectly onto negative emotion. So there's almost no difference whatsoever between being self-conscious and experiencing guilt and shame and anxiety. And so if you add the stress of puberty and that physical transformation to the emotional transformation, and then you take the extreme outliers on the negative emotion continua, it's all women, it's all young women. And we know as well from the literature on gender dysphoria that the individuals who experience gender dysphoria, first of all, don't have suicidal ideation or those sorts of symptoms any more highly than people who experience non-gender dysphoria psychiatric disorders. So it's a class of general psychiatric disorder. And if they're associated with negative emotion, that's going to mostly affect young women.
That makes such sense. And they turn it onto their own bodies as well. Like the shame and the self-consciousness
definitely.
get turned onto their bodies.
I'm going to replay that one more time because, hang on, I want to make sure I heard that right.
Experience gender dysphoria, first of all, don't have suicidal ideation or those sorts of symptoms any more highly than people who experience non-gender dysphoria psychiatric disorders. So it's a class.
I didn't know that.
Nice.
Are you saying nice to him sniffing a cat's ass?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
That's not the word I would use, but sure, whatever.
But, I mean, if that makes you happy, I guess. I don't know.
No, I don't care if it makes you happy. Don't do that. Don't do that. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I'm firmly against smelling cats' assholes. That's
yeah, because, you
that's
know,
not okay.
toxoplasmosis is a thing.
Exactly.
It's not good for you.
Yeah, you don't want that inside you. That's why
It's
I
like,
don't
do
understand.
you want crazy cat lady syndrome?
Right.
Hmm?
I will never understand people that... Yeah, so anyways.
Class of general psychiatric disorder. And if they're associated with negative emotion, that's going to mostly affect young women.
That makes such sense. And they turn it onto their own bodies as well. Like the shame and the self-consciousness
definitely.
get turned onto their bodies. And in particular, their breasts. It's not by
yes.
chance that they're cutting their breasts off. Like you put
Yes,
the
and it
bad
is-
into your breasts and you cut it off.
Well, it is this self-consciousness at the body level. It's clear as well from the evolutionary research. So women evaluate men for physical attractiveness and sense of humor and intelligence and so forth, but they also evaluate them on the basis of either social status or perceived capability to gain productive social status. Okay, men do not evaluate women for that. but they do evaluate them on the basis of their physical appearance, and they look for signs of fecundity and youthfulness. And so women are judged more harshly by each other, by men, and by biology itself, let's say, on the basis of their physical appearance. And so they have reason to be more self-conscious. And the reason they experience more negative emotion, as far as I can tell, at puberty, I think there's 3 factors that contribute to that. One is you get physical dimorphism really emerging at puberty, because boys get to be bigger than girls, and so that means if girls engage in physical combat with males, they're more likely to be hurt, and hurt badly. And so they should be more afraid in those encounters, and they are. And then women are also more sexually vulnerable than men, because they bear the burden of pregnancy and childbirth. And then also, and this is worth thinking about as far as I can tell, is that there's no reason to assume that women's nervous systems are adapted to make women comfortable. They might be adapted to make women hypersensitive to the sensitivity of infants. And that'll make women more tuned to environmental dangers. And the cost of that is that women suffer more emotionally. So you could imagine that the female nervous system might be optimally tuned for the mother-infant dyad and not for the mother herself. And then if you add to that the fact that all of those factors tend to make women experience more negative emotion than men, and then that girls run into that young when they hit puberty, then they're casting about for an explanation for that misery. And if that's provided for them, to them by the context, then they can be susceptible to emotional contagion, and social contagion. Anything that's associated with explanation for the negative emotion or any way out of it, like anorexia, like cutting, like body dysmorphia, they're going to be more susceptible to those sociological fads.
That all sounds incredibly familiar. Yeah. And they jump onto whatever's offered to them. And I would say about the trans social contagion in particular, is it's sold as a 100% immediate solution. Like, nobody tells an anorexic girl that we can just switch the anorexia off, but they do say to kids, if you're gender dysphoric, if you transition, magically you'll be better, and that all your problems will be solved because you're...
And we know from data, I just want to make this point really quick, we know from data, that is a fucking lie.
Yeah.
The transition, making a medical transition, almost never makes this dysphoria resolve. In fact, it often makes it much, much worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other sad thing about this, too, is the fact that part of the reason why it's being pushed as, oh, well, this is an immediate stopgap fixed solution, is the fact that surgery is really expensive.
Yeah.
And so it's more lucrative for the medical, for the medical industry to be like, hey, well, we're just going to get everybody all riled up to start pushing for people to have surgery because we need the money. It has nothing to do with whether or not, you're healthy or anything. If they found that it was more lucrative for people to get their arm amputated,
they would start saying that, we'd start seeing articles, the potential benefits of having one arm. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. All right, man. Hope you have a great day. But, and the other thing is not only the surgery, but if they get the surgery, then you'll probably be able to get them on a lifetime hormone regimen, which is a monthly payment from them or their insurance company. And a lot of these drugs, the hormone blockers, puberty blockers, hormone tablets, shit ain't cheap. No. I'm old enough to remember when a bunch of fucking classic liberal types gathered in New York to protest Big Pharma and Wall Street. And now, I think this is less than a decade later now, like, we're talking, like, I got off track. Liberals and Democrats are, like, absolutely slobbing the knob of Big Pharma at every possible fucking turn. They act like the clot shot is the greatest fucking thing to ever happen, and they seem to forget that they hate capitalism. They think capitalism is pure, rotten evil down to the core, and yet Big Pharma is fundamentally a capitalist venture. Like the cognitive dissonance. This is another reason I have no respect for anyone who's on the hard left, or frankly on the left at all, because if you vote Democrat, you're supporting this insanity.
Mm-hmm.
The cognitive dissonance you have to believe all of the things that they believe, because you can't go through more than one or two of their positions without finding two of their positions that directly conflict. They're against capitalism, but they want you to get the clot shot. They claim to be feminists, pro women, and then they want women to mutilate themselves and become men. They say that women should have the right to live their lives however they want to, but if a woman wants to have kids, stay at home, and be a good wife, they say she's suffering from internalized misogyny. They have no principles. And so all of their ideas eventually, this is why we often see the left infight to the degree they do. The left infights and eats their own at a rate that is, you only see that level of infighting among middle school girls. And it's a political party. It's insane.
Problems stem from not understanding that you're actually really a boy. And one other thing I would add, I'd be interested to hear if this resonates with you. Something that feminists have lamented really for decades is the way that, unlike men, there's not very much age solidarity among women. So a young man may look at a middle-aged man or even an older man and say, that's what I'd like to be like. Whereas younger women, I've noticed this really personally, tend to almost despise women past the menopause. And I think a lot of what they're saying is that they don't want to become that person. Like women don't want to become their mothers.
Yeah, well, that's pretty awful, isn't it? And well, I would say there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, my wife has started a podcast series where she's interviewing older women who've had successful careers and families, to have them lay out the course of their career and be rigorously truthful about it. I think part of the reason that, there's two reasons maybe that young women might have that attitude towards older women. And one is, I think that younger women are lied to almost all the time. And they're lied to partly by older women. I'm not going to put this on older women, right, because it's complicated. But, you know, younger women are told in no uncertain terms that the only important thing for them and what will be vital to their identity, and what should be vital to their identity if they're decent and honorable and ambitious young women, is their career. And that's simply not true for most women. And it's also not true for most men, by the way. It's definitely true for a subset of men. But for most women, the optimal life, and I think most women discover this in their 30s, is a well-balanced aggregation of family.
He likes turtles.
Kiwi turtles.
How you doing, man? Hope you're having a great day. We're just
Hello.
we're diving head first into the cesspool, bro. So
Yeah.
strap in. Hope you're having a great day, bro.
Marriage and career. And I'll tell you, every time I've made that comment, people have clipped out, say, 3 minutes of me talking about that idea. I get the most vitriolic comments that I've ever got when I've ever discussed anything, and all of them come from young women. And they're so vicious that it's actually beyond belief. And so that's an echo of what, and then the other thing is, our entire culture has turned viciously against motherhood. You know, we presume that if you're a moral agent, then you shouldn't bring any more rapacious human beings to expand the cancerous growth of humanity onto the planet. And that if you're a woman who wants to be a mother, then you're a second-rate citizen because you've subordinated your proper desire to have a career in the patriarchal world to this anachronistic birth machine mechanism that you don't want to be destined to. And all of that is pathological beyond comprehension, but it's also the situation that we happen to be in right now.
And it's also indicative of it circles back on the left's obsession with the idea that men can become women and women can become
Mhm.
men, and that the two are indistinguishable.
Yeah.
This idea was propelled forth by feminism and is getting more and more rampant throughout their ideology. But
Mhm.
what they fail to understand is that these differences are DNA deep, and a great deal of the things that motivate men, women couldn't care less about, and that's 100% obvious in your daily life. And a lot of
Mhm.
the things that motivate and interest women, men couldn't care less about, and that couldn't be more visible in your daily life. These two things are so basically factually observable that unless you're talking to a crazy person, a radical feminist,
Mhm.
they go without saying. Anyone who's even remotely grounded in reality can agree with those statements. But the left, feminists, want you to believe that no, 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 there's no difference between men and women. And so they try to push women into pursuing the same kind of lives that men pursue because that's what they
Mhm.
think will make them happy. Oh, if we're finally in the same footing as men, we'll be happy. No, you won't. Because men are made happy by material success. Men
Mhm.
are fulfilled by climbing hierarchies. Women are fulfilled by creating families. And
Mhm.
that is DNA deep.
Yeah. Yeah. Being able to, exercise your empathetic and nurturing nature and, you know, um, to reference like Proverbs 31, you have, on basically what it was to be an accomplished woman by, you know, Solomonic standards. She still, you know, was a physically fit person because she took care of her health. She invested and ran a business.
Kate, you didn't give us a name. Who is she?
Um, the the um optimal um example of womanhood.
You're saying the model of woman that King Solomon laid out.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
this was laid out. There was this guy that was going to become king, and his mother was telling him, "Okay, this is the a good woman is more precious than rubies."
Mm-hmm.
That's where that saying comes from. And she was telling him, "These are all the things that are to standard of what you should be looking for in an accomplished woman that's going to be, able to actually help you do the things that you need to do and go forward in life." And, she was a woman that was educated in the sense that, she was practically educated. She read, she, you know, um practiced different kinds of craftsmanship, and she was good with people. She was good with finances. She was able to, manage a household as well as be able to manage smaller, like outside businesses. At one point, it talked about her being able to, take the profits that she made and go out and buy more vineyards and other stuff, and basically be able to do things that were going to supplement and help him, all the while still being able to, be loving and caring towards their children and him, and, you know, basically being all purpose, therapist, caretaker, whatever, all of these things. This was the standard of womanhood. It was, basically being all the things that you are as a woman, and those are what make you great, as opposed to, you know
Trying to be a man.
trying to be a man. Yeah.
Right. I think to hyper summarize what you just said, men are builders, women are maintainers.
Right.
Women are best fulfilled in their role in nurturing something that a man has built. Or
Yeah.
and I don't misconstrue that to say that men build children. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about every other aspect of life. So
Hmm.
a man works hard to attain material wealth and he uses that material wealth to establish a household, and everything the man establishes, his wife maintains and puts in order, in the proper order, so it is optimized. And this is how the sexes create a near perfect union. Because when
Yeah.
a man is fulfilling his goal and a woman is fulfilling his goal, or excuse me, when a man is fulfilling his goals and a woman is fulfilling her goals, then the two really do often build something quite miraculous. And the the unrest in the modern family and the discord uh, between men and women, discordance between men and women in the modern age, it's because both men and women have fallen out of their natural place. Men have become philandering, sex obsessed, juvenile assholes, and women have become obsessed with being men.
As well as, becoming lazy and, not cultivating their minds or being able to do,
Yeah.
basic stuff.
Yeah, obsessing with their looks during their maiden phase, and then wondering why when they hit 35 they're bitter and unhappy and have absolutely nothing going for them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think we devalue age, and in particular, we devalue age in women. Like women, women once they're past the menopause are no longer seen as valuable because they're no longer beautiful and no longer potentially fertile. And I see the contradiction between that and what you're saying, but I think both are true. And so young women don't like the thought that they're going to turn into older women. I mean, I remember I was a young woman once.
I think, too, that to the degree that we devalue family and continuity between generations, that also leaves the vital role of older women somewhat up in the air, because one of the major roles that older women can play is as wise guides to younger women making their way through the complexities of career and family, and also to play out the role of supportive grandparent and to be there within that family context. And if we devalue family, then we reduce people to their career and their individual attractiveness. And then if attractiveness on the sexual front is waning, that reduces it to career. And if the career isn't stellar, then what's the remaining signifier of value? And the answer is, well, very little. And that's a pretty damn dismal prospect for anybody who's female, who's moving through the world. So
yeah, and you don't like to look forward and see that that's what's coming for you. So that makes it quite important not to listen to what older women say. To parody what somebody like me says about, say, child safeguarding, like to mock it and to say things like, "Oh, won't someone think of the children?" Well, yes, I do want to think of the children, thanks. I am a mother, and I think it's one of the most important things I do is think of the children. But that seems mock-worthy to a lot of younger people, and in particularly, strangely, to a lot of younger women.
Yeah.
That's because they've been taught that way. And the difference between a modern woman's view of older women as opposed to how older women were viewed back in the day, it's stark. Because older women back in the day, a lot of them were actually revered for having made it that far. And people were actually encouraged to seek their wisdom.
Yeah, there used to be there's a reason that the trope of the wise matriarch is such a trope in storytelling for generations, thousands of human generations in multiple societies, Western, Eastern, up, down, left, right, center. The wise matriarch was a revered position to hold in society, and the matriarchs of families had immense value to those families and the immediate people surrounding that family. They were often consulted and gone to just as often as patriarchs. And again, the destruction of what it means to be a woman and this obsession with material beauty and the value of a young, fertile, youthful woman as being the hyper focus of femininity in the modern age has erased the value of women who have gone past menopause. In
Mhm.
order to find the difference between two things, we have to find the similarities first and take them away. The difference is what is left. Being a man or a woman is a sensation. No, it's not. It's not a sensation. That's not true at all. Being
Right.
a man or a woman is a biological reality.
Yeah.
It's not a sensation.
Either you are born with a uterus, or
Well, I
you were
wouldn't
born
even
with
go
other
with
stuff.
that. I wouldn't even go with that because birth abnormalities do happen. Either you're born
Yeah.
XY or you're born XX.
Yeah.
And oh well, what about intersex people? Shut up. It's a
Okay.
disingenuous argument. It's less than 1% of the population. Stop using statistical outliers to try to make a broad argument for the general population. It's one of the most incredibly disingenuous forms of argument there is. Have you noticed that both man, woman, when they are babies, are very old? They look very similar, so it's more about the soul than the physical body. A farmer woman can have way bigger arms than a man. Not really. Not really, dude. I'm sorry. You're just not. You're just not being honest with the facts of the matter.
Hmm.
I think the thing about babies and old people, I don't think that's true. I don't think old people look like babies. That's a matter of opinion. And then without the use of performance enhancing drugs, even a woman who works for a living like on a farm will not be as big as a guy that just like goes to the gym twice a week and works an office job. Men stack on muscle easier, they maintain it easier, they are able to build more, they have bigger frames, their bones are bigger. What you're saying is just not true. And this
Hmm.
is I dude, and I have medical credentials. I'm a certified personal trainer and I'm a certified decompression chamber operator. I have a very healthy level of study into human physiology. I know what I'm talking about. Sexual dimorphism is a lot bigger than most people think. It's a very big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Well,
I did want
you
to
know,
say though, one of the things that I thought was cool back in the day, and I think they should bring this back. Okay, but the reason why there's a trope in old period dramas about when a woman reached the age of 16 and had her coming out, essentially, basically, society was told, okay, you're a woman now.
Mm-hmm.
That was the whole basis for like Sweet 16 and all that other stuff.
Yes,
It
Kate.
was,
Yes.
whatever. So it was um mandatory that she go for at least 6 months abroad and travel and be the companion of an older woman, so
Mm.
that she had a whole 6 months to a year of education at this woman's elbow, and she was basically to tell her all that there was about being a woman and what kind of standards she needed to meet up to.
That was largely a fluent European thing.
Well, and it was in some, adopted some by the English, and here in the East, like the East Coast part
Okay.
of the United States, um, which is why sometimes they would uh, they would talk about the girls from their farms or whatever going, being sent back east. It was for those reasons. If they had a wealthy enough um, relative for that to happen, she would go back east and become pretty, and then they would send her back home and she'd get married and all that. So, but yeah,
well,
I
the
think
other
that should
thing
be
that
brought
seems to
back.
happen, I would say too, is that the social media networks are set up so that casual, derogatory, derisive, narcissistic mocking is not only allowed, but staggeringly prevalent.
And
And
encouraged.
it's not, well, that's it. It attracts attention and is encouraged. Now, we have to talk during our conversation today about the role that narcissism plays in all of this.
Yes.
The mobbing, the derisive online comments, and the transsexual phenomenon itself, as well as this claim that subjective claims to identity trump everything, because there is no more signally narcissistic claim than that.
Yes,
I am
exactly.
who I say I am, and no one else has a say. It's like, well, really, in a marriage, let's say, you're just who you say you are. You don't have to negotiate your identity with your wife or husband. You never do that with your children. You never do that with your friends. They just go along with whatever game you want to play every bloody second of your life, do they? And if they don't, that makes them evil predators and valid targets for derision and mocking, and worse than that, because as you know perfectly well, this online mobbing behavior that's driven by thoughtless narcissists not only is psychologically destabilizing because of its vitriolic quality, but also can certainly reach its tendrils into the confines of your job, let's say. I mean, it's become impossible for me to work as a psychotherapist. I had to leave my job at the university because it became impossible for me to function in both those domains. And so I would say this narcissism is also encouraged by educational institutions, because they take young people in and they say, well, your immature messianic desire to save the world, which could be admirable if channeled properly, should manifest itself in this vehement activism that puts you in position of ultimate moral authority over your seniors, let's say, instantly, and that's what you should be doing. And anyone who opposes that is, evil and predatory at best, and as a consequence.
What I'm trying to say is that I never judge the genders on physical form. Why not? That's not, like, if that's how you personally choose to live, I'm not going to say you're wrong for doing that, but there's no good reason not to. The human eye can detect gender in less than half a second. We evolved to be able to do that because it's a fundamental survival skill. If you're a man and you're out with your hunting party and you know for a fact that the three dudes that are all part of your cave group, they're probably your sons or your brothers or your uncles, they're all behind you, you can hear all of them behind you, and you see another man 50 feet in front of you, you know he's part of a rival group or a group you're unfamiliar with. He's dangerous. We got to kill him. We evolved that right out the gate. It was one of the first things we as humans, all the way back to when we were monkeys. Like, it's a fundamental skill, and all mammals, all vertebrates have it. They can distinguish sex at a glance because it's a fundamental survival skill. And so saying that you don't judge sex or gender at a glance, okay, fine, you can live that way, but you can judge sex and gender at a glance 99.9% of the time. Hang on, AutoMod held a message here. I'm going to review it, but now it's very confusing. Yeah. So, and then the one who can produce sperm for me is a man. Yeah. I agree. Again, biological reality. I agree with that 100%. And I agree that sometimes surgery and hormones, like Blair White is a great example. I would never look at Blair White and think that's a guy. I just wouldn't. No one would. Now, I would think that person has had work done, and she is someone who focuses on her appearance as being as Barbied up as possible at all times, because Blair White does do that. But Blair White does not look like a man. So, of course, with enough time and effort, a man can look like a woman or a woman can look like a man. But most of the time, even if they make an effort, you can still tell right away.
When no punishment is too extreme.
And alongside that, that you must choose your identity off a list of dozens and sometimes hundreds, like they require the most intense, constant rumination and self-examination. I mean, I was talking to somebody just yesterday who was telling me that a child who's 12 now, has this check sheet for how do I feel? And this is a really happy child. But you're meant to be thinking all the time, like, how am I feeling right now? Am I, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy am I? How this am I? How that am I? How the other am I? This is all a terribly bad idea.
Well, it's clearly bad. Look, one of the things I learned when I was treating people who were socially anxious, I had a lot of anxious people in my clinical practice, which is hardly surprising because that's the kind of suffering that requires people to seek clinical intervention. So socially anxious people, when they go into a new social situation, think obsessively about how others are thinking about them.
Yes.
And so then they become self-conscious, often about bodily issues, but not only that. They might become self-conscious about their lack of conversational ability and the fact that they're not very interesting and the fact that they're being evaluated by other people. It's a litany of obsessive thoughts. And you might say, well, you could train people to stop thinking about themselves, but you can't stop people from thinking about something by telling them to stop thinking about something. But what you can train people to do is to think more about other people. And so one of the techniques that I used in my practice was, okay, now, when you go into a social situation next time, like we'd go through the niceties of introducing yourself and making sure they knew your name and get that ritualized so that it was practiced and expert and therefore not a source of anxiety. But the next thing is, your job is to make the other person that you're talking to as comfortable as possible, to pay as much attention to them. And so we know that the more you think about yourself, this is literally true. There is no difference between thinking about yourself and being miserable. They load on the same statistical axis. And so these kids that are constantly being tormented by 150 identities, so that's a front not of freedom, but of utter chaos, and then asked to constantly reflect on their own state of emotional well-being and happiness is the surest route to the kind of misery that's going to open them up to psychogenic epidemics, let's say.
And that's a very key point, because that plays out across not just the issue of mental health and self-identity and all that stuff, but it plays out across multiple facets of human civilization. For example, racism. If people stopped fucking obsessing over racism and stopped constantly talking about how racist things are and systemic racism and all that bullshit, racism would cease to exist in the West in a matter of years. I mean, really, probably if there was just some kind of widespread cultural movement that had high success and people just shut the fuck up about how racist absolutely nothing is, by the way. Like, there is no systemic racism at a large scale level anymore. There's racist people. There is no systemic racism. If people shut the fuck up about it, it'd be gone in 2 generations, guaranteed. Down to such a minute level that it was virtually impossible to find a racist person. But when you constantly obsess over it, when you constantly desperately point out every little fucking thing that could possibly have any hint of racial slant to it and say that's racist, it keeps it alive. You mean by talking about it, you keep it alive. Exactly. By definition, by talking about things, you keep them alive. It's the same thing. It's the same thing with, to look at something completely innocuous. Think of like fandoms for intellectual properties. If people stopped talking about Star Wars, if the first 3 movies had come out and people had talked about it for a year or 2, and then people had just been like, all right, well, that was whatever, we're not going to talk about it anymore, we never would have gotten any more movies. They would have stopped making merch for it. It would have died off and gone into the pile of history. But people kept it alive because they obsessed over it. They talked about it constantly. When you talk about things, when you constantly make sure there's a conversation about them going on, the thing stays alive. The same is true for racism, communism, socialism, bigotry of any sort. All of these things, they're kept alive by people talking about them. You might think, well, if we aren't talking about them at a cultural level, that's not going to stop the individual racists from being. Yes, it will. Yes, it will, because we're a social animal. If someone with racist views sees that no one is talking about racism, and people are unwilling to talk to him about his racist views, he's going to stop thinking about them all the time because no one will talk to him about them. And they are going to leave his mind as a forefront issue. And he might hold those beliefs in his heart, but they will leave the front of his mind, and he will cease to express them in any overt way. And that's how racism would die in about 2 generations if we just shut the fuck up about it.
Or, if the pendulum were to swing in the other direction, you would have, that person, um, if they didn't stop thinking about it or whatever, if they just staunchly held on to their beliefs, it would cause them to stick out like a sore thumb, and society would be more likely to hold that person to account if
Right.
it had become something that was so rare.
Right. Exactly. Because the squeaky hinge gets the grease. The sticking out nail gets the hammer. We as a society, humans are a social animal. We as a society, when there's something intensely different from the rest of society, we focus in on it, and if we have any united cultural principles and values, we generally hammer that thing until it goes away.
Yeah.
If it is indeed something bad, like being racist.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, the racism is being kept on. This is a Thomas Sowell quote. Racism isn't dead, but, or excuse me, how does the quote go? Basically, he said racism isn't dead, it's being kept alive by people who race grift. Is a paraphrase.
It's on
of
life
Thomas
support.
Sowell. It's on life
I
support.
think was what he said.
Yeah. Yeah. And it couldn't be more true. It couldn't be more true.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The clinical data on that are clear.
And then you land into that, the idea that you may have been led to believe that because you're a not very feminine girl or a not very masculine boy, that means that really you are of the opposite sex. The fact is you're not, and no one around you is going to think that you are, because you don't look like the opposite sex. And you become even more self-conscious, like self-consciousness brought you to this point, and now you're hyper aware.
And that, I just want to make an accessory point to that really quick.
Yeah.
And what the LGBTQ are doing now is they're trying to make your personality a gender. They're trying to make your personality, I mean, for a very long time in the gay community, being gay has been your whole personality. That's been a thing for like 20 years now.
Yeah.
But recently it's been expanding to kids, and now like your pronouns and your gender identity and your sexual identity are your whole personality. And that is inherently not good for you, especially at a young age, for multiple reasons. Partially because of the narcissistic aspect, partially because kids should not be obsessing over sexual matters. Hypersexualizing kids at a young age is fundamentally bad for them. And the literature only backs that up. But that's what the movement is doing, is it's teaching people to everything about you needs to be related to sex. Everything about you needs to be related to your gender expression. And your gender expression can literally be any fucking thing. So now we have people going around calling themselves clown, clown self, clowns self. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? There's no such thing as clown gender. You're making an idiot of yourself. Stop it. Fucking stop it. I know you're a woman. I can see your tits. You have no Adam's apple. You sound like a woman. Shut up. You're just making an idiot of yourself.
Yeah. Or, what's fashionable this week, apparently, is being a paint person.
Yeah, that's what she has a family relative who is now using paint pronouns.
Not just that. It was all over libs of TikTok.
Was it?
And several other sites. Apparently, that's the trending thing right now. Is being a paint person.
Which is what exactly?
Changing your pronouns to refer to yourself as paint and paint self, and those things, because that's apparently a gender. I wanted to ask, oil or acrylic?
That everyone around you doesn't think of yourself as the way that you've just presented yourself, and then you're watching for misgendering, and you're actually being told that it's a really terrible thing to do and that no one would do this unless they really hated you and they wanted you to die. Like, they want you to disappear. They want trans people dead. They want them gone, you know? I mean, that's what people say about me, that I want, to cause a genocide of some sort. And I mean, like, when did I ever write such a thing? So
Wow.
what that is it's the feeling that you've put all of your ability to care about yourself, understand yourself, define yourself onto other people and how they're looking at you, and they're not looking at you right. They're looking at you funny. So you are now out of control.
Add to that mix, okay, so we could add a couple of other layers. So kids that are well socialized and popular develop that ability between the age of 2 and 4.
Right.
And what they undergo this psychological transformation in identity. They go from a 2-year-old egocentrism, so the 2-year-old can only play a game with him or herself. They can't play a shared game.
The beard, for example, reduce the gender confusion. Yeah. Yep.
And so 2-year-olds will play in parallel, but they can't play a joint game. And that means that their identity, this is so important, their identity is purely subjectively defined. And they have temper tantrums if you interfere with that. Okay, now between 2 and 4, most kids extend their identity out into the communal world. And so one of the ways they do that is, imagine 2 little kids between the age of, say, 3 and 5 playing house, a little boy and a little girl. The little boy will ask the little girl, do you want to play house? And she'll say yes. And so what that means now is they've established a joint identity for the time span of their play. And the joint identity is that they're both engaged in the same epistemological world, in the same conceptual world. And then they negotiate roles. Say, well, I'll be the daddy and you be the mummy. And they can flip that role, by the way, and sometimes they will because they want to play out the other side. But generally they pick a sex-appropriate role for obvious reasons. And then, having established the goal, so let's pretend...
Which, by the way, just as a side note, a lot of parents are being told now that, oh, well, if your son during the course of playing with his friends pretends to be a girl for any length of time, that means he's trans, even if he's 2 years old. And no.
No.
No. No. I cannot stress to you how much that shit pisses me off.
Yeah.
Kids have been, especially between the ages of 2 and 5, sometimes up to 7 or 8, have been pretending to be the other gender for fun for time immemorial. That is just a human thing to do.
Yeah.
And so pretending that makes your child trans, are you completely forgetting what you were like when you were a kid? Are you just pretending that you never played dress up with your sisters or your female cousins? My female cousins dressed me up in their dresses when I went to visit them when I was a kid. I guess I was trans all along. I guess I better go chop off my dick. Come on.
Well, a lot of people they forget about the fact that during those ages, a lot of child psychologists will tell you they're in what they call the serve and return stage, ages 2 to 5, and this is another reason why like the whole mask thing was a problem, because not being able to speak properly.
Mm-hmm.
So they're building empathy
Mm-hmm.
when they're pretending to be the other. So automatically just jumping to the conclusion of, oh, well, this automatically means that they want to be a girl, or this automatically means that they want to be a boy, is erroneous, because what they're actually doing is building empathy by experimenting as the other.
Right. And that's such an important thing to understand in male-female relations, is that these neurological pathways for empathy are established early. If you socialize your children early and make sure that their interactions with the opposite sex, you need two ingredients to make sure your child is healthy with the opposite sex. Early interactions with the opposite sex in supervised, to some degree supervised, and safe, responsible play, and a good parental figure of the opposite gender. If a child has those two things, they will be able to relate to and get along with the opposite gender fine as an adult. If they do not have those things, they will not. It's proven scientifically that the thing that affects the most is that the thing that affects the most the mind of a man. Yeah. Oh yeah. Women, for the average man, for 98 or so % of men, women are the central motivating factor in our lives. They are getting a woman and having a woman to go home to is the only thing that a man cares about at the end of the day. And he'll lie, he'll say it's not true, especially in the modern age, but everything a man does is to impress women. Getting a good job, working out, learning skills, cultivating any level of intellectualism, all of that is to make yourself more appealing to women. Unless you're part of that 2% that are hyper success driven, or you're neurodivergent in some way.
Yeah, I would also like to add to this real quick. This also means that people who have boys, if they feel the need when they're playing with girls to dress up and, like wear dresses or let the girls put makeup on them and stuff, don't get angry with them.
Yeah.
Because it really is, I know this sounds cliche, but it really is. It's just a phase.
Yeah.
Is all it is.
It really is a phase. It's perfectly, and here's the thing too. You can look at the boys' response, because not all boys will consent to it. Not all boys will consent to being dressed up. And you can look at the boys' response and you can get a pretty good forecast on how he's going to relate to women as an adult male. If he's a boy that will let all of his female friends or his female siblings dress him up and paint his nails, he'll be a male who's much more willing to entertain the flights of fancy of women and will probably be a little bit better at socializing with women as an adult male. And if he's chooses the hypermasculine route, then it is very likely that he will only be able to relate to women in a romantic relationship type relationship, which is not bad, but it does tell you, it gives you an idea how many female friends a man will be able to have. 1 second.
Household, which is a form of thought, they have to jointly establish an identity that's acceptable to each other. And then they have to do something even more sophisticated, which is they have to conduct themselves in those roles so that the game is fun, so that both people will keep playing, and so that both people want to keep playing with each other. Now, it doesn't take much thought to see that that's an analog and a prodroma to what you actually do as an adult when you enter an intimate relationship that's long-term, is you play house in the long run. But so what happens is between the age of 2 and 4, your identity moves from egocentric and subjectively defined to communal and negotiated. And now this idea that we have that your identity is only what you...
Quick translation for that. If your identity revolves around yourself and your gender identity and your pronouns and who you like to have sex with, you're a fucking 2-year-old.
Yes.
Just so that's clear.
Yeah, you don't have any more emotional or mental proclivity than a toddler.
I personally, when I look to a sexy woman in very tight clothes, I feel like I'm lusting and I lose energy. But when I'm with my wife, it feels the opposite. She gives me energy, like it's in every great man. Yes, that there is a lot of truth to that expression. Behind every great man, there's a great woman. let's keep the misinformation to a minimum today, guys. Misinformation police.
Your sarcasm is
I
welcome.
love it. I love it. Welcome in, misinformation police. If your name is any indication, the Democrats sent you. Welcome in. I like you already. And you know, when I'm lusting after a woman, I don't think that zaps my energy, because I have, not to be misconstrued, but I have a somewhat predatory nature in that I like to feel like I'm pursuing. I like to feel like I'm hunting, and I think a lot of men feel that way. But there is a different sort of energy to being in a steady relationship, to having a consistent partner, and those two things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but they are very different. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but that's a side tangent. I'm not really going to get into that one right now.
You say it appeals not only to, I suppose, the ideologues that are pushing it, but it also appeals to people who are developmentally stuck. And I mean this in the deepest sense, are stuck at a 2-year-old level of psychological development. And I think maybe there's a couple of reasons for that. You imagine a lot of kids are only kids now, so they're not socialized by their siblings. A lot of kids have older parents with lots of resources, so they're sheltered in a way that children never have been. And a lot of kids are exposed to computer screens and TV screens at a very early age, so they don't have the opportunity to engage in the kind of dramatic play that helps them develop an extended social identity. And so it's possible, on top of all this, that we have an epidemic of narcissism that's being capitalized on by the woke ideologues, who are also likely suffering from the same psychopathology.
Yes, and so you see a lot of things together. You see a lot of different needs or weaknesses or pathologies that are playing out in sync with each other. And so these children, I really do think that they're victims, they're necessary victims of an ideology. So if you're an adult man who wishes to be seen as a woman, and the most important thing that you want is to have people believe that this is something innate, that people are born this way. And that means that there must be children who are trans. And it's not relevant to you whether or not that's actually the case for the individual children. The children are the sacrificial victims of the ideology. And so you've got adults who are using children as props for their description of who they are.
Okay, so let's dive into that. So one of the things you do in your book is you detail out a lot of sexual fetishes, tracing them back a couple of 100 years. So imagine that you're a hyper-masculine male. Imagine you're a little narcissistic in your masculinity. And let's say there's a part of your psyche that regards that as unbalanced. And so what happens is you start to have fantasies about the value of the contrasexual temperamental virtues. And those would be the feminine ones. But given that you're not very conceptually sophisticated, maybe the way that counterbalancing tendency manifests itself in you is in fantasies of being female. And that fantasies are so damn deep that they actually involve even the sexual impulse. So Carl Jung, who I think thought more deeply about this than anyone else, believed that as we move through life, and we expanded our personalities, that we would expand them beyond the confines of a rather stereotypical gender identity and incorporate the virtues of the sex that we weren't. So that would mean for women that they would become more emotionally stable and also more disagreeable as they got older. And for men, it would mean that they became more emotionally vulnerable and more compassionate as they got older. At least they would extend their capability into those domains. And that was a necessary part of expansion and maturity. And then if that's forestalled by narcissism, let's say, or even by inability, then the proclivity to develop those contrasexual tendencies would start to manifest itself in the kinds of fantasies that you described as characteristic of the autogynephilic transsexuals. And so then if you think that narcissism is part of what's driving that, right? I'm pushing too hard in the direction that I'm going, and so these fantasies manifest in a compensatory way, that you get a perfect storm. And it's the narcissists who are doing this that insist upon subjective identity, and who also, by the way, are perfectly willing to sacrifice children to their own purposes.
Absolutely. And two things that you notice when you look at these people are, one, what they're seeing when they look in the mirror is not what you're seeing. They're seeing a fantasy. They're seeing a fantastic version of themselves. But you, who are not in love with this idea of the feminine version of this man, you're seeing something a lot less flattering, and that's very hurtful to them. That's experienced, I think, as a psychic insult. That, because
Right.
it's like being flipped out of the fantasy. Like if you're in this beautiful fantasy and then someone laughs, or someone calls you he. And then that's narcissistic rage is what you see as the response to
That's
that.
right. That's
Right.
Yeah, because you bring them back to reality. Because
Exactly.
you're not on the same wavelength as their inscape. And that's why they talk about so much when in their language alignment and agreeability. Speak in aligning terms.
Where is that in the common rhetoric of these people, Caitlin?
Well, when they talk about, creating a safe space
Okay.
and using their proper pronouns, and I was summarizing basically. But in other like, because they're also a big part of the manifestation community, like the whole law of attraction, law of assumption people. They're
Kate,
making their move.
Kate, you're drawing a parallel between two communities that I don't think is there. I really think I understand what, Kate. I think you're misconstruing something. You're drawing a correlation between two communities when what is actually taking place is a not convergence, but the LGBTQ and the trans
An
ideologues.
assimilation.
What?
An assimilation.
An assimilation of specific techniques and cultural methods of not assimilation, methods of not unification, homogenizing. Homogenizing.
Mm-hmm.
You're drawing the manifestation people, the people who are like, mantra yourself into being rich every morning in the mirror. The trans community and the trans ideologues have picked up a lot of those techniques for use in their own ends, but the two communities don't intersect that much. Kate, you're misanalyzing that. One community is stealing techniques. They're not, but the communities aren't intersecting. At least not as far as I've seen.
Well, because I've had to look at how a lot of them language because of the book that I have coming out, World Next Door, has to do with a lot of quantum jumping and the creating and sustaining of inscapes. And one of those things, one of the building blocks of that is language. And one of the things that they talk about is making sure that all of the language for these things is specific and on point. And if your language is not aligned with those around you, it disrupts the vibration and basically ruins the fantasy, essentially.
Right.
And so a lot of these people are actually morphing themselves into this community also.
Yeah, well, it's not just that. It's not just that. It's also that paradoxically, it's very funny. They paradoxically try to take all meaning away from language. They try to remove objective roots from the meaning of language, but simultaneously, at their deepest psychological level, they hold on to that meaning so that the terms they use to identify themselves still mean the thing that they want it to mean. And so there's a conflicting principle there, which is, again, cognitive dissonance.
Mhm.
So that's a very interesting aspect of these people's psyche as well, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But more
Yeah.
to the point that I stopped the video to make, I wanted to highlight this again. This is, again, illustrative of the fact that these people are mentally too. Because when
Mhm.
you misgender them, they go hysteric. They throw
Yes.
insane temper tantrums, like that famous video of that dude in GameStop flipping his shit because the employee refused to call him ma'am. It's like, dude, your throat is bigger around than my bicep. You're a dude. Your
Yeah.
voice is deeper than the Marianas fucking Trench. You're a dude. But he insisted on being
Yeah.
called ma'am. And when the employee wouldn't, they lost their shit because they were throwing a temper tantrum because he's 2 years old
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
every way that matters. And that's
Yeah.
also, by the way, why these people are so dangerous. What do 2-year-olds do when they're really going ballistic? They start breaking shit. They start hitting
Mhm.
people. You have to teach your 2-year-old very early you're not allowed to hit people when you're angry, because if you don't teach them that early, they will grow up to, when they're angry, they hit things. And that's why a lot of these people are so dangerous. They're mentally
Mhm.
too, and when when you're mentally too and you get upset, there's no
Mhm.
telling what you're going to do. What do you think about the drug influence on the subject? Does it help the absolutely not. Absolutely not. As someone who was an addict, and I guess depending on how you define being an addict and how you look at it, you could say I'm still an addict because I'm a recovering addict. I've been clean for a year and a half or so now. Drugs make it virtually impossible to think clearly while you are on them, and even the periods between use, while you're still in your usage period. And I'm just talking about street drugs like cocaine, Molly, LSD. Those drugs make it incredibly hard to think clearly and objectively and logically. When you're talking about drugs that have a much greater effect on your mind, well, ecstasy is just Molly. Ecstasy is just MDMA, which is Molly. That's what primarily constitutes ecstasy, and sometimes they mix other bullshit in like caffeine or heroin or whatever, but ecstasy is supposed to be just Molly. Yes, it does alter the mind, and especially when you're talking about hormone blockers and estrogen and these kinds of things, they not
Mhm.
only alter your perceptions in the moment and your ability to think clearly, but they physically alter your brain. So yes, they deeply affect your level of confusion. What about curiosity? I'm not sure what you mean by that, but I will say that any drug that is affecting your mind is going to affect everything that constitutes your mind and personality. So your curiosity, your agreeableness, your emotional regulation, your enjoyment of certain tasks, your sex, all that stuff. Anything that affects your mind is going to affect all of that to some degree. It'll affect some things 1%, it'll affect some things 100%. It just depends on what the drug does to each individual.
That's right. It's narcissistic rage at, in many ways, the same level that you'd see in a thwarted 2-year-old.
Yes, yes. And it feels
And-
like
and
that when
I-
you're at the receiving end, I have to say.
Yeah, well, that's for sure.
I've done
feels
both.
Exactly
I've felt
like
both.
that. Well, right. And when you see these activists on this front melt down and have a tantrum, especially if you have a clinical eye or you've been a parent, you think, oh my God, like that's exactly what 2-year-olds do, and that's a hell of an early developmental level to be fixated at.
Yep.
Yeah.
2, that's really bad. That's really bad.
Yeah.
That shows a real
bad.
disjunction in psychological development. So it's no wonder this is felt as seriously affecting by the people who are affected, because
Yes.
it's so deep and it involves core issues of identity.
And I think it must be felt very differently by a man who's looking at it like you and a woman like me, because it's not just that it's offensive that this man is doing what looks to me like a poor and very parodic imitation of a woman. It's also that I am expected to play along in a way
And hyper sexist.
Mm-hmm.
Hyper sexist.
Yeah.
that it really casts me as a supporting actress in my own life. And if I step out of role, the rage that this brings down is absolutely extraordinary. Like, you're acceptable as a woman as long as you're going along with this. And then if you mention any tiny little bit of need that a woman might have, like just one vulnerability that a woman needs that really requires that all males are excluded from somewhere, all males, even the males who identify as women, it's as if you've done the worst thing that it's possible to do. It's like saying to the 2-year-old, go to bed or brush your teeth, or no, you can't have another biscuit. And it's a meltdown. I presume it does feel dreadful to that person, but it's ugly to see it in an adult.
Oh, I'm sure it does. Well, it's terrible if you watch a 2-year-old having a temper tantrum carefully. And most people won't, because they'll turn away because it's too disturbing. If you watch a 2-year-old having a temper tantrum, one of the things you realize is that
I always thought it was pretty amusing to watch 2-year-olds flip out, personally.
Yeah.
Especially the ones that are understandable, like no, you can't have another piece of candy, or no, it's time to stop playing. The ones that are based in something that's somewhat logical and reasonable for them to be upset about. It's like, that's cute. But then the ones that are really fun to watch are, no, you can't drink soap. And they flip the fuck out. It's like...
Yes.
And it's the same exact way. And it's the same exact way with trans individuals. No, you can't go in the women's locker room. And they flip the fuck out. No, you can't participate in women's sports. And they flip the fuck out. Even though these are things that are based in sex for very good reasons. I will never cease to understand, or excuse me, not understand, that's not the right word. I will never cease to ponder how we went from protect women, women's rights, enacting legislation to make sure women had guaranteed spaces and equal opportunity, and having this somewhat overzealous, but at least a noble cause fixation on protecting women from sexual predation. How we went from that as a society to, oh, it doesn't matter if he has a penis, let him in the women's locker room. I don't care if there's a woman who's been raped in there who has PTSD about it. We should still let the guy with a dick and balls in there because his feelings matter more than hers. Like, are you fucking... That's evil.
And they want to say evil. That's not sexist?
It's apparently not sexist, and it's apparently not predatory, and it's noble and great, and it's like, you're fucking evil, and you're not even trying to hide it at this point.
No.
That's literally the same thing as someone who has PTSD from someone attempting to stab them to death, and you walk up to that person with a knife, and you're going, ha 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 ha. It's the same fucking thing. And you think that's okay? Like, are you fucking kidding me? It drives me nuts. It drives me absolutely fucking nuts. That women's spaces, and for that matter... but you know what? And here's another thing that really pisses me off and really irritates me about this. There is no push by trans men, women who want to pretend to be men. There is no push by those individuals to get access to men's locker rooms and men's sports. It's only running the other way. Yeah. And that tells you something very important about the movement. It tells you something very important about the movement. And what that tells you is they still understand. They still have a recognition of the realities of sex-based difference. Because if women pretending to be men tried to force their way into men's spaces, they would be shoved out forcefully. Not even maybe because of intolerance or the men being like, no, this isn't happening, but just because they would not be able to hack it in those circles. Men are brutal to each other. We play very aggressively as children and adults. We're verbally and emotionally brutal to each other. That's just normal male shit. Whereas women are agreeable, docile, friendly, nice. And so men are able to impose themselves in women's spaces with a higher rate of success. And so it happens.
Overcoming of their developing ego by those internal systems of rage and distress is a catastrophic defeat for the beginning unity of the individual. And so then what you do, if you're a parent with any clue, is that you set up the environment so that tantrums are brought to a halt and eradicated in some sense as a form of acceptable behavior as rapidly as possible. And you don't do that by suppressing the child's capacity for anger or distress. You do that by integrating the capacity for distress and anger.
I didn't think Jesus was also the Son of God. So he's kind of exempt from typical male behaviors. But if you would be so kind as to reflect on the fact that Jesus did braid a flail out of corded leather and beat people until they fled in fear when they were selling stuff in the temple. So even Jesus Christ himself had the capacity for righteous wrath.
Yes.
Just keep that in mind.
To a higher order personality. So, and this, you talked about this parody element. So let's go into that, because I've noticed this too. A lot of the behavior that I see on the part of people who are aping women, let's say, looks to me like a parody. And I think that part of the reason they get so mad at women who don't play along is because they also have this fantasy of women, femininity, as merely as passive, receptive, all-encompassing. You know, it's kind of the counterpart to the submission element that goes along with dominance and submission play that you often see more hyper-masculine men attracted to.
In Quran, in Arabic, it said God has no son or wife or whatever. God is like nothing else. Jesus is a prophet, but I respect your opinion. Well, see, I do not believe that. I believe that Jesus was the Son of God in a very real sense. I believe that all children, that all people are children of God to some degree, but I believe that it's perhaps best expressed in my beliefs as I think Jesus was the greatest child of God. But yeah, and a point that God, I got. Hang
And
on.
so a passive, receptive, all-encompassing. You know, it's kind of the counterpart to the submission element that.
And I just, yeah, that's right. I wanted to make a point about what Jordan was just saying. It's very funny to me that so men pretending to be women, they insist that they're women, but they don't assimilate any of the core psychological aspects that make women women. Because if you told a woman, an actual biological woman who was pretending to be, let's say, a cartoon character.
Yeah.
And she was just pretending, and you told her you're not actually that, she would laugh it off or be like, well, I know. Or she'd be like, yes, I am. She'd be playful about it, but she would, she would, for the most part, back down from the issue, even if she was pretty serious about the issue of pretend. When you tell men they're not actually women, they flip the fuck out, further illustrating they're not actually women.
Right.
Because women are more agreeable and docile. It's absolutely hilarious.
Goes along with dominance and submission play that you often see more hyper-masculine men attracted to. And so I think that when women stand up for themselves, they also violate the image of docile and receptive femininity that plays such a major role in the fantasy life of the people who are engaged in, say, cross-dressing.
So I think that's absolutely right. And I would add something else to that, which is that I think that both sexes do have a somewhat maybe idealized version of what it is to be a member of the opposite sex. And, you know, a man may have a fantasy version of what just an ordinary man, an ordinary heterosexual man who's happily married and has female friends. He may also just have some quite fantastical ideas about what it would be like to be a woman, like that, you can lie back and let the man do the work, or that it must be lovely to be so fragrant all the time, or something. You have you have these very superficial ideas of what it is to be a member of the opposite sex. And that's true, I have to say, in pornography as well. Like, women as imagined by men in pornography are nothing like real women, just like the men who are written by women in erotica are nothing like real men. And you see that too in these, what look to me like parodies, but I don't think they're intended to be parodies. They're not meant to be insulting. The man is describing what he sees.
I wouldn't be so sure about that. I wouldn't be
interesting.
so sure about that. Well, because we also don't know to what degree the vitriol that's directed towards women, that's a consequence of this narcissism, is also a reflection of a genuine hatred. And this is why we should never forget just exactly what kind of radical and revolutionary genius Sigmund Freud really was.
Yes.
Because Freud put his finger on the key pathology of our time, even our time more than his, because he regarded the Oedipal complex as the source of all pathology. And the Oedipal complex was essentially the catastrophic consequences of the non-judgmental, non-discriminating, hyper-compassionate, all-accepting maternal spirit. And so Freud's idea was something, and you can think about this biologically too, Freud's idea was something like this. So human beings are peculiar among animals, let's say, and there are 2 or 3 developmental reasons for this. First, we're born fetal. So because there's an arms race between the child's head circumference and the carrying capacity of the female pelvis for purposes of birth, if the pelvis was any wider and the hole in the middle any wider, then females
We'd waddle
couldn't run.
everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And so the way we've ironed that out over evolution is that babies are born far too young. They're born at 9 months instead of 2 years, and their heads are compressible. And that's why the mortality rate for human babies is so high. It's a real narrow passage into life, let's say.
Yes.
Okay, and so what that means is that humans are hyper dependent, particularly for the first 2 years. But then, because we also have this amazing plastic, socially constructible brain, at least to some degree, we have this immense period of dependence. Now, the risk in that is that because we're so dependent, an excess of compassion is necessary, especially in the first 6 months, because imagine the right response to a human infant under 6 months of age is, you're 100% correct about anything that distresses you 100% of the time, and your needs have to take priority over absolutely everything else. And mothers have to be wired to provide that.
Yes.
Now, the problem is, so this is why the psychoanalysts, they said, the good mother necessarily fails. And so the mother has this terrible conundrum. She has to be willing to sacrifice herself to this infant fully. But then as the infant matures, she has to sacrifice her own compassion and pull back and start to become harsh and more encouraging and demanding simultaneously. Now, if she has a man along with her, that's easier because it's easier for him to play that role, and that's a cardinal role that the masculine spirit plays. But Freud's point was, well, this protracted period of dependence exposes us to the terrible risk that we never emerge out of infancy. And the terrible devouring mother is a symbol of the person for whom compassion has become a hyper-dominant and devouring force. And that is precisely the political problem of our time. It's that this reflexive compassion that is now deemed, it's deemed morally necessary, that it must govern everything. If you don't feel absolutely 100% sorry for people as if they're infants, then you're a predator.
Yep. And that started with the mantra of tolerance. The left started with that word. And once they pretty much had tolerance nailed down in the cultural lexicon and in the minds of the average Western individual, they moved on to acceptance, which is different than tolerance. If you tolerate something, that just means you don't actively persecute it. But if you accept something, well, now not only do you not actively persecute it, but you accept it as being normal and a regular part of life. And and if it's normal and a regular part of life, well, then it's either amoral or even good. And that is the gateway of psychology that the left has used to make things that are obviously deviant, like pedophilia, as being much more open to discussion and acceptance than it ever has been in our society before.
Yeah, because another word for those two words in this instance is enabling.
Right. Exactly. And we all know someone who has enabled the bad behavior of people around them. And most enablers are women. And that's because they lack that ability to turn off empathy and agreeableness and kindness. I love my mother dearly, but without getting too far into detailer, my mom is an enabler. And I've seen this firsthand play out, what overt and unending empathy and compassion does to someone, and it's not good. That's why I don't use the phrase tough love anymore. That's just love. And just this unending willingness to accept someone as they are and put up with their bullshit and never call them out on their faults. That's not love. That's the opposite of love. You're letting that person destroy themselves and entrench themselves in the worst aspect of themselves because you're unwilling to not accept it.
Yeah.
For whatever personal reasons you have.
Yeah.
And two things that I was thinking when you said that. One was that what I'm doing when I refuse to accept a man who says he's a woman as a woman is I'm like the mother who's refusing to give the infant what he wants, which is really a wicked person. Like we think very poorly of predator. Those people. Yeah. And so the rage is there. I'm stepping out of role for a woman. And I think the other one is the most enraging thing for anybody is to desperately want to be something that they can never be, or to desperately want something that they can never have. And so, a man who's got himself into this headspace where he can be a woman in his own mind, somebody who says no, and that no can be in 1/1,000,000th of the world. It can just be in one place. It could just be in rape crisis centers, say. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. That is taking away the dream and being a very bad woman, stepping out of role for a woman.
Well, especially for this hyper-idealized, feminine, compassionate woman, right?
Yes.
It's all-encompassing and all-loving and all-nurturing. And you see this again in 2-year-olds. I'm just watching this right now with my grandson. The most magic word, the magic word for 2-year-olds is not please. The magic word for 2-year-olds is no.
Yes, they love it.
I would say 20% of the utterances of a 2-year-old is no. And that's because no is the word you use to give yourself some space in some sense. And so 2-year-olds don't like it when you say no to them. It makes them mad, and they push the boundaries, as they should, because they need to find where the boundaries are. That's what you should do when you're 2. And if you haven't had those boundaries organized for you in a systematic way that enables you to expand your personality so that you can find alternative cooperative routes to adaptation, and you just face this arbitrary no, or you don't face it at all, then you're going to end up being a person for whom no is it has the same effect on you as it does on a recalcitrant 2-year-old. It demolishes your entire emotional being the same way that no demolishes the world of a 2-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, and the very strange thing is that sometimes this is described as, conservative or even libertarian values. So I just saw somebody here recently say, I'd like to see the Conservative Party here in England make the case for self-ID, the conservative case for self-ID, that it's not anybody else's business to tell you who you are.
That's such rubbish.
Exactly. It's a total misinterpretation.
Insanity.
Yes.
Well, the idea that identity is subjectively defined is utterly preposterous.
Yes.
It doesn't apply in any situations where there's more than one person involved. And then this weird devolution of that idea, it's like, well, not only do you get to say exactly what you are, Now, first of all, we could talk about what you are, what you are means. But the second part of that is, and it depends on your feeling. Well, what is that feeling? Is that your moment to moment balance between positive and negative emotion? That's now the arbiter of reality itself. And then what are you? Well, the answer to the question, what are you, is it depends on the context. And we actually know this, personality researchers know this. So we all have a temperament, that's partly biologically instantiated and partly socially constructed. But if you look at how much our innate temperament, measures of our innate temperament can be used to predict our behavior from situation to situation, it tops out at about
Welcome in.
Ah, man, Joe Biden's diaper. That's got to be one of the worst jobs in the world.
I feel really sorry for you.
Oh, God. You know what?
Oh man, what number are you?
Right. How many in the line of Joe Biden's diaper? Are you Joe Biden's diaper, the 506th,
Yeah.
the 10,000th? Not only does Joe
Oh.
shit on me, but all of Americans. You know, I at this point, because you can't see, there isn't any bulge around the hips when he's wearing a suit. So I'm pretty sure he's either wearing a colostomy bag at this point, or they like Jill bends him over every morning and just puts in a plug.
Oh my god.
But yeah, yeah, that's a golden ass name, bro. Absolutely love it. Welcome in. Pleasure to have you.
Amazing.
We have a Discord. We have a Twitch. If there's a bunch of other places to find us, if you feel so inclined. I'm number 3 today. Today. Whew. Goddamn.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
9 to 16%. So that means, and maybe 25% in the case of IQ, which is the most powerful temperamental factor we know. 75% of what determines your outcome, even on the cognitive front, is social context. And that means, like the progressives claim to believe, that about 80% of your personality is socially negotiated. 80%. And so also what that means is, so imagine you're temperamentally extroverted. And so you want to talk like I do all the bloody time. I'm still going to shut up mostly in a funeral.
Right.
Right. Now, I might be the most talkative person at the funeral. Right? But I'm still going to use the context to regulate my behavior. And what that means is that the context actually defines my identity. And that's how it should be. That's what happens if you're a civilized person, is the context defines your identity.
Right.
Period. The end.
Yeah, and then the strange thing that layers on top of that is that not only are they saying that how you feel defines who you are, they're saying that it defines who you are, that you're a woman or you're a man. When those are just about the most,
And
concrete.
to Caitlin, what's that thing you often say about sarcasm?
Well, that it's which thing? The thing about the fact that if someone cannot detect sarcasm, that most likely they have some kind of a cognitive development issue or a proclivity for psychopathy.
Yes. And so, well, and more specifically, that they lack an ability to think strategically.
Yeah.
And I just think that's relevant to this conversation, because one of the trademarks of these people is that they're incapable of properly processing sarcasm, and they're incapable of proper processing of humor, especially humor that is directed at them or their community. And I think that further illustrates the point that Jordan is making right now, is that these people's identities are not only unsophisticated in that they disallow adjustment of identity for circumstance, but they are also incapable of incorporating anything they find disagreeable in their identity. I'm on deck if you guys need anything. Hit me up in some DMs, bro. Nah, I'm just kidding. I've been clean for a while.
We
But,
have a
welcome in.
Discord.
We have a Discord. Welcome in, Hunter's Crack Dealer. If you have any intriguing information for that's behind the scenes, I'd love to have it. Oh God, what a Hunter Biden! What a piece of shit. Yeah. But yeah, I this idea that these people have that their identity is 100% their own, this thing that they own, it's, I understand why you would think that, because, well, it's my identity, isn't it? But what they fail to understand is who you are should change in relation to what's going on around you in the world in a more grand scale, but also in your own personal life. For example, non-binary. Welcome in, non-binary. Thank you very much for the follow.
Thank you for the follow.
Sincerely appreciate it. We are Team Adventurous. Welcome to the adventure. We do politics on Saturday, and we do fitness streams just about every day. Usually in the afternoon or early evening. But these people, they have no nuance to who they are or their ability to think about who they are. They have one setting, and that's part of why they're so socially inept, why they're so uninteresting and boring.
Yeah.
And why they get so angry when their identity is challenged, because they have no greater cognitive ability to process what it means when there's a challenge to who you are.
Yeah. Well, that's because they spend so much time curating and thinking about who they are, because it's the only thing consuming their mind, and that's another reason why they have an inability to translate context or, layman's terms, read a room.
Right.
Because they're spending so much time looking inward, they don't have the ability to look outward anymore.
Right.
Things about us, the most non-negotiable things about us, the most bedrock things about us, like far more than our IQ.
Well, they might be the most bedrock thing about us, right? Which maybe is why the culture war is centering on this issue. Because if it is a war between epistemology and ontology, or between, let's say, narcissistic delusion and reality itself, then the battle devolves to identity on the grounds of sex, right? What did Freud say? Biology is destiny.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't believe that entirely.
Well, it isn't true entirely.
Well, on top of biology, we have got this civilization that we've built, and it's very anchored to biology. Of course it is, but it is also to some extent malleable. Like, we do co-negotiate it in different societies to some extent on top of that. But then to have this idea that a man can say, I wish I was a woman, or I feel like I'm really a woman, or I think I'm a woman inside, which are things that only a man can say. I can't.
Well, first of all, welcome in, Chad. How you doing, man? Good to see you finally showing up for a politics stream.
And that would have to acknowledge that she was actually real.
Yeah. That's like what Caitlin said. That's if you believe that Adam's first wife, who later became Lilith, even existed. And I think that the evidence for that is scant. One might even say dubious. Right. Do I think a lot of women today are infantile and underdeveloped emotionally and mentally? Abso-fucking-lutely. But I think the same is true for men.
Wish to be a woman. I can't feel like I should have been a woman. Those are things that are only possible for men. And then those things are meant to make you a woman. And then it's so detached from reality that there's no tether. It can go anywhere.
Oh, shit.
So socially
fuck.
anxious people, when they go into a new social situation,
Ah,
think
no.
obsessively.
Caitlin, where was I? Shit.
I don't know.
Context defines that. Hang on.
More emotionally stable, and they're
Meant to make you a woman. And then it's so detached from reality.
in ontology, or between, let's say, narcissistic ideology is destiny.
Now, Kiwi, you know I disagree, so you're gonna have. I'm not gonna debunk the same thing multiple times in the same conversation. So either clarify what you mean, or I'm just not going to address that because I fundamentally disagree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't believe that.
Not true.
Yeah, well, it's just not true. Yeah, it's if you're making the argument based on, well, not every man is masculine and not every woman is feminine, that doesn't mean they aren't a man or a woman. A man can even have more feminine traits than he has masculine traits, but still be a man. Hyper feminine men exist, and they're still men. I don't respect them, but they exist. And hyper masculine women who are just the manliest fucking women you've ever met exist, but they're still women.
Entirely.
Or are you talking about not every woman is female? Yeah, if you reversed the order of those words, if you said not every male is a man, I would agree with that. A lot of males are boys. And that includes 30 and 50-year-old males. They're boys. If you said not every female is a woman, I would agree. A lot of women are little girls. A lot of females are little girls. If you reverse the order of those words, we would have a statement we could agree on. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
And of course, Chad, but believing you're a girl does not make you a girl.
No.
That's like so. Oh, it's objective truth. I often go back to the example of The Rock. I am an absolute believer in the value of objective truth. And if I hold up a rock and I say this is a rock, it doesn't matter if you call it a spoon, it's still a rock.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you call it air, it's a fucking rock. And no matter what word you use for it, the objective truth of the matter does not change what it is.
Mm-hmm.
You're really sick to think chopping off your mushroom tip makes you a girl. Yeah. I inverted my penis, so now I'm a lady. Yeah, sure. Okay, bud.
Like,
Go over there and don't bother me, and stay away from kids, please.
Well, it isn't true entirely.
Well, on top of biology, we have got this civilization that we've built, and it's very anchored to biology. Of course it is, but it is also to some extent malleable. Like we do co-negotiate it in different societies to some extent on top of that. But then to have this idea that a man can say, I wish I was a woman, or I feel like I'm really a woman, or I think I'm a woman inside, which are things that only a man can say. I can't wish to be a woman. I can't feel like I should have been a woman. Those are things that are only possible for men. And then those things are meant to make you a woman. And then it's so detached from reality that there's no tether. It can go anywhere. Like this can just float off to anything at all. And that's why we see this weird proliferation of, a poorer gender or somebody being grey sexual or something. It goes off into sort of almost stamp collecting levels of precision and difference and so on.
Well, there's another issue that comes up there too, is so, and this is relevant to your claim, which is entirely warranted, that we vary on top of our biology. And so, for example, there is a lot of biological and socially constructed variance in temperament on top of biological sex. And so you could say, without fear of error, that a reasonable percentage of boys have a feminine temperament. And so that would mean they have more negative emotion, they're more compassionate, and they're more interested in people than in things. Those are the cardinal differences between the masculine and the feminine. And a non-trivial number of boys have those characteristics, just like a non-trivial number of girls are less compassionate and polite, so more competitive, let's say. They're more emotionally stable, and they're more interested in things. Now, those are relatively rare girls and relatively rare boys, but statistically, they're hardly, what would you say? They're hardly
Irrelevant.
They're not so rare that you don't see them all the time. It might be 10% of boys are essentially feminine in their temperament, and 10% of girls. And that's a lot. And what that should, and so that's at the level of temperament, which is really where gender should be conceptualized, because there are no good measures of gender. There are good measures of temperament and interest that differentiate men and women. Like if you use measures of temperament, including interest, you can reliably identify someone as a man or a woman about 80% of the time, something like that. So you can do it 50-50 on the basis of chance. And with the best measurements we have, you can get that up to 75-25 or 80-20. But that's certainly by no means perfect identification. And so one of the things that's perverse about this too, isn't it, is that despite the claims of the radicals that identity is socially constructed and variable, their fundamental notion is that if you have a variable temperament, so if you're a feminine boy, then what that means is that your biological reality is out of sync.
Yes.
Because the biology is so fundamentally important in that case, but never in any other case.
Yes.
It's so incoherent, man. It's unreal.
It can completely. And I mean, also, if we were to say, which would be a terrible thing to say, and I don't say it, if we were to say that this 10 or 20% of boys who are actually, statistically speaking, more like the standard for girls, if we were to say, well, actually, they're really girls, that's not what we're seeing. There's no objective claim here. That would at least be semi-objective or be absolutely repulsive as well. They're just slightly out of the ordinary boys, you know? But it's the people who are claiming that a man can tell you he's a woman or a woman can tell you she's a man.
Just
Because
as a
these
quick-
things only matter if it's convenient to them.
Right. I just want to make the side point, too. Where that is going on is at the hyper superficial level. Oh, my son is playing with Barbie dolls. That means he's a girl. Oh, my girl is dressing more like a tomboy. That means she's a boy. It's that what they just described, using sex-based differences as the marker of whether or not someone is the opposite gender, whether they are. That is taking place at the hyper superficial level. And that is why this ideology is so obviously insidious and malicious in nature. That's why gay people have started talking about the erasure of gays. It's like, so if a boy likes to paint his nails and spends more time looking at boy band posters than Victoria's Secret models, then he's a woman. It's not just that he's a gay boy. And
Right.
and what amazes me is just 10 years ago, the left was absolutely screaming out of their minds to fight for the idea that gay people are born that way, which I basically agree with. I think most gay people, I think probably around 90 or more % of gay people are born with the predisposition to be homosexual. But the fact that that now the movement is saying, well, if you're this way as a child, that means you're the opposite gender. Well, so you're erasing homosexuality. You're erasing your own group of people that you fought so hard to protect, and this is why the ideology, the cultural, the unholy abomination of cultural movement that is intersectionality is inherently absolutely fucking moronic. Because these people can't move in any direction to advance one of their groups without stepping on another group. Because what they fail to remember is any group that has significant differences from another group is going to have unique needs, is going to have unique desires and a unique goal in that group. And you cannot homogenize and unify every single marginalized group under the same set of goals. That's just not going to work. Eventually, one of the groups is going to be stepping on one of the other groups, which is why the left infights so much. Geez, Zach, getting all transphobic. He's scared of trans. I've never met one person. I'm not afraid of trans people. I am deeply concerned about them and deeply concerned about the effect they're having on the culture. Could you stop being a troll for 2 fucking seconds and have a serious conversation? Please, Chad. English is very confusing. In Arabic, with a single word, I can define a group of people or males, but in English, you can say they, you don't know if they are females or males, supposing they are not mixed, of course. Yeah, Kiwi, that is a problem when people who learn Arabic and Middle Eastern based languages,
Mhm.
Middle Eastern based, that's not the right way of saying that. I think Arabic is the root language for that language tree, right, Caitlin?
What?
Arabic is the language at the bottom of that tree of languages, and then there's a bunch of languages that come off of Arabic.
Hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So what I was gonna say about that, I know you're joking, Chad, but it gets old. But what I was gonna say about the Arabic, Kiwi, is you might be interested to know that the international language of flight is English, because English is a language that is incredibly effective at communicating very detailed information in a very short amount of words.
Mhm.
So while Arabic might be able to describe a broad concept in a single word, it's not detailed as you just said.
Mhm.
Whereas English, we can in a very short number of words describe a very detailed concept with high precision, and that's why it's used for flight, because obviously when you're flying a plane full of a couple hundred people and trying to land it, and there's a bunch of other planes swirling around the same airspace, you need to be precise.
Yes. Being concise is best in that situation.
Same for the soul and body. In English, there is only one word, like sick. In Arabic, we have sick soul and sick body. Being a male is more about the mental. The soul, while being a man, is about. Again, you're mixing up male and man again. You're swap male and man in that comment, Kiwi. But would not simply the complicated. There is complicated things in the world, and we have to take them as they are. Yeah, yeah, you do have to approach complicated things as they are and try to gain gradual understanding of them. I do agree with that. Um, but
But
in that pursuit, having a language that's complex like English is very useful.
mhm, yeah. And, with English being able to boil things down to their essentials is very important because if you're the one defining the chaos, you get to create the order. And the best way to do that is boil everything down to
To its
its
essence,
true essence.
right? Which is why I get in hot water with my buddy Mason from the UK quite a bit because I'm hyperbolic. But the reason I'm hyperbolic is because I really distill things down to their essence, and I speak in absolute terms of what things really are or where things are really heading. In general, when I speak, I do not speak with nuance unless I think the nuance is relevant to the understanding of the subject. Um, that's something that pisses a lot of people off.
Well, there are ways to speak of complicated things in a concise manner because if it is a complicated thing that's important, oftentimes time is of the essence. So, um, like it says in, I believe it's in Proverbs, in a multitude of words, there is transgression. So if you are just word vomiting all over something, oftentimes the truth is what gets lost.
Right.
And so, since the tongue has the power of life and death, and those that eat of its fruit, those that I think it's those who love it eat of its fruit. So basically, you know, understanding that words are powerful, boil them down to their essence. Think of things like the ocean in a single drop rather than a drop in the ocean is usually best for things that are complicated because you can get to the root of the problem. Um, He says, okay, if the opposite of good is bad, then what is the opposite of
Evil.
evil?
And see, in English, it's the same word, good.
Yeah.
Or perhaps for this discussion, a better word would be virtue. The opposite of
Because
evil is virtue.
what is bad for you might be good for me, but what is evil, it can be only evil for both of us. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
because just because something is bad doesn't necessarily, well, That's why you have things like things that are unfortunate. Okay, this circumstance was unfortunate for me, though it may have been, a serendipitous situation for you. There are multiple words for things, but, you know, used in context, which is another thing that I love about English being based in Latin because it's a very contextual dependent language.
And to some extent, English is too. But the context of English relies a lot more on, especially in writing, punctuation. In speech, the context is usually analyzed through inflection and tone and volume. But in writing, it's through punctuation. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
not. Well, this isn't a writing 101 stream.
Yeah.
Not going to get too far into that.
Yep. Language is important.
There's no way you could say, nah, you're actually just very like a man, so you can't be a woman. Like, in particular,
men.
he could be a rapist, which is the most masculine thing, So we don't even say that a trans woman who commits rape thereby.
Whoa, okay.
There
All
are
right.
female
All right.
rapists too.
All right, bitch. Your misandry is showing. The most masculine thing is to be a rapist. How about you go fuck yourself for that, okay? There's nothing masculine about being a rapist. You're just a piece of shit.
Demonstrates that this claim to be in some gendered way really a woman has been disproved.
Yes, so in your book, you also talk...
Unvaccinated subhuman. Hello.
Hey.
Welcome. And thank you for the follow.
Thank you very much for the follow. I too am unvaccinated scum. Welcome in. Are you dying of COVID yet? Because I gotta tell you, I'm counting the days until I catch the Kofefi and die a horrible death. I was supposed to die last winter. Joe Biden said so. But, I didn't. So I'm really counting my days. And I'm just dreading every moment. Welcome in, man. Hope you're doing great.
Well, more like we're...
I don't have a vaccine passport either, bro.
Hey, we don't either. It's
Either.
okay. Yeah.
So there's another element that's at work here too, and that is
but rape was done by a man. A woman can't penetrate. Well, I mean, if you strictly define rape as the forceful vaginal penetration or forceful anal or vaginal penetration by a penis, if that is your strict definition of rape, which I understand why that, I get it, that's not wrong, but I disagree with it, but it's not fundamentally wrong. But I understand why you would say that. But so then we'll say then women can also commit sexual assault. And
Yes.
it can be just as damaging and destructive to the individual receiving that sexual assault as a man raping a person. All throughout history, when men went to war. Yeah, that's not something to put an LOL after, but yes, that is true. That is a historical reality, and that's even still modern reality. Wartime civilians get raped. That just happens.
transformations are also on
and don't take that as me casually, callously dismissing that. It's a terrible, horrible fucking thing. I say it with that dismissive tone because that's a reality that unfortunately I can't do anything about. Just so that's clear.
the cutting edge of a transhumanism that's also aimed at in some sense.
Yes, women can rape you, and that is something that we as a culture don't talk enough about, in my opinion, and it's something that I've been on the receiving end of multiple times. So I'm very well acquainted with that. Pregnant
dude. Well,
I walk around with a pillow under my shirt, and if you don't accept that, then you're a bigot.
oh man, that's lovely.
Oh my god! Did you?
Oh.
I take it that you watch Netflix's He's Expecting, like you watch like 2 or 3 episodes of that religiously every day. That's probably like your Bible, then, isn't it, pregnant dude?
Pregnant dude.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
At the eradication of death itself, right? So there's another utopian dream.
I directed.
Oh, wow! Welcome in. We have such an esteemed audience member.
Oh man, yeah. Somebody, please usher him to the VIP section of the comments section.
That's sitting underneath this, which has its positive element, I would say, too, because we are trying to improve the length of our life and to rejuvenate ourselves.
Thank you very much for the follow, pregnant dude. Hey, when you
Hey,
give
nice.
birth, please make sure that your child also follows Mason About Called Mandatory. We are Team Adventurous. Mandatory. We do a lot of this. We do gym streams every night. I'm also a gym rat, and I'm going to compete in a powerlifting meet soon. So we do a lot of fitness as well, but we do this every Saturday.
And there's an open question here is, well, how far can the transformations of our identity go in an increasingly technological world, and how far should they go? And so, and the transhumanist types who believe, for example, that our consciousness could be uploaded into a computer and that we could be propagated forever, also have a proclivity to fall into the camp that says that your identity is only what you say it is, right? It's this soul idea that's independent of the body, and there's a wish in that to be free of the chains and constraints of mortal existence. And you can understand that as well, but running away from something into fantasy.
Wasn't Ray Epps a murderer? Hang on. I'm pretty sure Ray Epps was a fucking serial killer. Or was Ray Epps the fucking FBI guy? Hang on. Is an American former basketball player. Hang on. Ray Epps, FBI. Yeah, are you talking about the... You're talking about the fucking FBI guy from the January 6th crowd. That's who you're referencing with your name, isn't it, Ray?
And welcome in.
Huge fan of the stream. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Welcome into the chat.
Is not the way to address it.
I mean, it is a fantasy, isn't it? And it's a fantasy that's rather similar to being of the opposite sex. The fantasy that, you know, you can control death itself, that life and death are in your hands. It's the fantasy of being a god, not just being immortal, but being a god. And sometimes people express that as, you know, terribly light ways to talk about.
Skeeter, modern gender theory, or how we went from 2 to 200. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my god, that just really quickly reminds me of this meme video that I saw on YouTube. It's
I love the name.
What, Skeeter 63?
Yes.
Why?
I don't know, because it's Skeeter. It's just funny. It just sounds funny. Okay.
I guess it does. But there's this video on YouTube. It's a definition of all the genders. Hey, you guys are badass. You have an awesome weekend. We appreciate that very much, Ray. Thank you very much.
Too.
Sincerely appreciate you. New
meme. Gender
tard.
tards. Oh.
But yeah, it's a video that just goes through all the genders, and so it starts off male. Male is an individual with XY chromosomes, typically possessing a penis and testicles. Female, an individual with double X chromosomes, typically producing a uterus and able to produce children. And then it defines transgender. Transgender was defined in the 60s. First transgender person had surgery, blah, blah. And then it goes on to, like, epigender. This gender does not exist. Demigender. This gender does not exist. It just goes through all the 76 Twitter or fucking Tinder genders. And it just keeps saying, TikTok. Does not exist, does not exist. And it's just, I saw that video and I was just like, yes! made me feel so giddy. It was like yes, that's that hard hitting
So
shit.
happy.
What are
Yep.
major
They're
operations?
22.
Like anyone who's been through sex reassignment surgery, as it's called, although of course we can't actually reassign sex, will tell you that this was a major operation.
Right.
And the question of how content you are with the outcome depends a lot.
I love Florida, man. I own some
Yeah.
property in Florida, and let me tell you, having been there, I've been to Miami and the Jacksonville area, and I absolutely fucking love Florida. Absolutely love it down there.
It's great.
On how realistic your ideas about it beforehand were. So if you're someone who's lived with gender dysphoria for many years and you do it, then it may actually just make you feel a bit better. But if you thought you could be turned into the opposite sex, you will be disappointed, because we are not made of meat Lego.
I also
Right.
don't
Meat
think
Lego.
the data that this actually makes people feel better is really very clear.
it isn't.
I'm not sure at all that the tiny minority of people that we help, first of all, are truly helped.
Yeah.
Because there's so much ideology obscuring this, and so much self-deception and narcissism on the part of the people who are doing it and undertaking it, that we don't have clear data. But what we bloody well do know is that a huge number of people who are doing this have been pulled into a psychogenic fad and then are undergoing unbelievably dangerous hormonal transformation, because hormones are no joke. They are powerful physiological agents. And then the surgery itself is, well, if the only way it could be more brutal in a fundamental sense is if it was done without anesthetic. Right? This is not something you waltz into for one day and then like it's a minor modification of some trivial element of your identity. These
But
are
it's talked
life-changing
about
procedures.
as if it is. And
I
it's
know,
talked about that for children
exactly.
as well. That you can go through the opposite sex puberty, or that, the wilder reaches of the trans lobby will talk about things like putting all children on puberty blockers until we grow up enough that we decide which puberty we want to undergo. And I mean, I was...
And there can be a man can have no female puberty, even if you pump him full of estrogen. It's just going to stunt his male puberty and misdirect his male puberty. There can be no opposite sex puberty. And what you do when you do that to a child, you encourage osteoporosis, you encourage arthritis, you encourage cancer, you encourage neurological malformation. You could potentially make that person become psychotic. You could make them schizophrenic. You could do all kinds of horrible things to their mind that are irreversible.
You can make them autistic.
Well, I don't know about that one. That's a behavioral disorder that's much more rooted in DNA level stuff.
Well, you could give them something that mimics autism.
Definitely.
You will retard their development.
Yeah, no doubt about that one. No, yeah, something that mimics autism, absolutely. Much like, for example, the masks did to kids. The developmental stunting that took place because of the mask usage, and there's a whole fucking Paul Joseph Watson did a great video on this. I can't remember if it was on his main channel or his second channel, but he did a great video documenting all of the sources, all of the news outlets, and all of the articles and journals that are now talking about how kids have been stunted by mask wearing, and a lot of it is mimicking autism, in that they can't speak, they can't communicate, and it's and the idea that pumping a kid full of hundreds of cc's of the opposite sex's hormones isn't going to do something as bad or worse to them. I cannot stress enough how disgusted I am with this whole movement, and how there are so many people on the LGBTQ side that don't see a problem with this, that are just going along with it. It's like, if you have any moral foundation at all, if there's any good in you, as soon as they started talking about butchering kids or pumping kids up with chemicals, you should have been like, I'm out. I'm not identifying as LGBTQ anymore. I'm not voting Democrat anymore. I'm now actively working against this because we have gone way too fucking far. If you had any moral grounding, that's what you would have done. But, of course, most of them haven't. It's really sad.
Yeah. Because they've been given this idea that somehow they're horrible people if they're not accepting and tolerant You're not being loving or kind by enabling or accepting.
Right.
The kindest and most loving thing that you can do is to say no.
Right. Sometimes, well, not even sometimes, tough love is the only love. Because if you really love something, you are willing to say no. You are willing to say, this thing is not good for you. And if I'm in a role, if our dynamic and our roles are as such that I'm within my rights to stop you, I'm going to stop you because I love you. And if our roles are such that I cannot stop you because you're an adult, or some other dynamic is in place where I have no power to stop you, then I'm going to tell you, you should not be doing this, and I absolutely will not condone you doing this. And if you persist in doing it too long, or if you go too far into the lifestyle of doing this, we will no longer associate. And that is not being cruel or hurtful. That is what love actually looks like.
Yeah.
Brought up Catholic. I'm no longer a believer at all, but I listen to this and I just think that's demonic, actually.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a thing for an ex-Catholic to say.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, but don't
Well,
you think so? To say that to children, to give children that idea. I think, whosoever mislead one of these children.
Mental illness, that's the word we use for that. Mental illness typically is very different from body sickness. That's why we have the two words cure and medicine. We often say there's a cure in this music for your soul, while for the body we use the word medicine when I cut myself or get a virus. Yeah. And in the American lexicon we have different words for defining those two different things as well. Like I said, there's a lot of words we use to define very specific things. And by the way, something that needs to be understood is, depending on the body illness, it's going to affect you mentally. In fact, most bodily illnesses affect you mentally to some degree, but some, for example, if you have chronic thyroid issues, it's going to drastically affect your mental health because your thyroids regulate your hormones, which have an immense impact on your mental health. And the same is true for your mental health. If you're screwed up enough mentally, it has very bad effects on your body.
It's the worst thing you can do. Yeah. And they do all the time.
So let me ask you about this then. One of the things that I have noticed is that people tend to come to religious convictions not so much when they discover the nature of good, but when they discover the nature of evil and the reality of evil. And you described yourself as a lapsed Catholic, let's say, but you've been talking about the battle that's been happening right now in religious and theological terms, and I think that indicates the depth of the battle. And then also making the case that, while the willingness to sacrifice children to the dictates of a narcissistic ideology borders on the demonic, it's pretty strong language for someone who's not religious. And so one of the things I've been concerned about is that when God dies, to use the Nietzschean phrase, and we no longer attribute to God what is God's and attribute to Caesar what is Caesar's, we start to attribute to Caesar what is God's. And that contaminates the political with the religious. And so I think that even if you're a secularist, you have to start to understand, if you're sophisticated, that some elements of the axioms of perception and cognition themselves are so deep, they're so fundamental, that they're outside the realm of the political. They might even be outside the realm of the philosophical. They're down in the realm of the sacred. And that's true whether you're... Okay, so why? What? Given your lapsed Catholic state, let's say.
Hey, Terry. Appreciate that lurk, man. Hope you're having a great day.
It's weird, right? Because there's this ambivalence in your conceptualization. I don't
feel
diagnostic
ambivalent
about this.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to hear about that.
So I don't describe myself as a lapsed Catholic because really I just don't believe at all anymore. But the reason I don't believe is that I don't think it's true. It's not because I can't feel the emotional and spiritual content of what's being said. It's that I think it's factually false. And maybe that just shows my lack of poetry and imagination as a human being, but I can't get past it anyway. However, I do think that there is something sacred in the creation of a new life by a couple and a mother who grows a baby for 9 months. I've done it twice. It's not something that you could or should talk about in monetary or financial or economic terms, or even in prosaic everyday terms. It's something extraordinary. It's a miracle. In secular terms, you've done something miraculous. And then children are such precious little things, you know. Like, I feel that as a mother, I feel it as a sister of 8 younger siblings, and as now an aunt to 19 children, you know. It's not something that we should treat so lightly. And because I was brought up Catholic, as an Irish Catholic, the language that I turn to, I have no other language to use for how seriously I take the wrong that is being done.
Look, in my clinical practice, it was always the case that when I was dealing with the most fundamental catastrophes of people's lives, or the most profound experiences of their lives, that the language would automatically become religious.
Yes.
And that was the case even if the people that I was talking to were explicitly a-religious or secularist. And the reason for that is that we actually have a domain of deep language. And when we fall into the domain of deep language, we're in the domain of the sacred. And I've been trying to think about that technically. So imagine this, you know, we have this notion of literary depth, right? Some stories are shallow, some stories are deep. Okay, and everyone feels that, and everyone pretty much accepts the fact that same with music, the same with beauty, any art form, there's shallow aspects and there are deep aspects. And deep aspects move you, and they move you deeply. So they have emotional resonance, and they call to you as well, right? They call you to a better version of yourself. And part of the depth, so imagine that the deeper an idea is precisely proportionate to the number of other ideas.
Now I understand more why Mario is trying to save the princess. You care to clarify on that one? Because I'm not sure what you're talking about with that one.
That depend on that idea. Right, and so then as we move down into the depths and we start talking about, well, the category of sex, for example, or that stellar purity and attractiveness of children, which you really see if you can see children. You're way down in the depths when you see that. That's how children reward you for having them, right? Is that there's such a responsibility and such a miracle at the same time, that the miracle of the relationship that you can have with them amply repays you for the responsibility if you can only see it. But then you have to go down into the depths and take that relationship as a sacred reality and ethical requirement. And yeah, you deal with those things casually at your great peril.
And it's funny, I mean, I said that you don't use the language of economics about them, but I mean, there is something I often think, and I say it in a jokey way, but I'm completely serious too. I mean, a child is the ultimate non-fungible good. Right. So fungible things are the things that it doesn't matter which one it is. One piece of gold bullion is the same as another. One barrel of oil is the same as another. One child is not the same as another. And if you lose a child, you can't replace that child. So why is that? Like, why do we feel like that? Well, obviously, in my opinion, evolution gave it to us. A religious person might conceive of that differently. But the feeling is the same. And I find now, in ways that before I found this topic, I have fruitful and interesting, to me at least, conversations with religious people, because they take this seriously. To them, you know, they feel a sense of awe at God.
Well, right, that awe of awe. Well, what you see, I think, when you have a relationship with a child, your own child in particular, because you can see them most clearly in some real sense, is that you see the manifestation of the image of God.
I mean, to me, it's evolution is the thing that did that, but evolution gives me that
fine.
same sense of awe, you know? It's not something you treat lightly. It's not something that isn't miraculous. And this seems like maybe we've gone off topic a lot, but I think it's why mothers and people who care about child protection are among the people who are most disturbed by what's happening here. Because if you take children seriously, and if you take the task of creating a world in which little human beings can turn into healthy, whole, responsible, good adults who can live full, rounded, satisfying lives that are not just good for themselves, but good for the other people around them, you know, that's, again, I have to turn to the sacred language, like this is a sacred task. And to see people so willfully tell small children lies like that you can be either sex if you want, or that sex is a spectrum, or that we were assigned a sex at birth, or that some people are non-binary, or that if if when you're 7 you decide that you're really a boy, you'll just go on puberty blockers and take testosterone and there'll be a little operation. And I feel livid at these people, really livid.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. Well, hence my banning from Twitter, let's say. And I've taken a lot of flack about that, when people tell me, well, you were so mean to Ellen Page. And I think, well, Ellen Page is a star, and she advertised her transformation and made the claim that this has revolutionized her life. And then she displayed her new body in a public forum and got 1.7 million Instagram likes for it, and probably enticed, well, let's say one young girl who's confused into becoming sterile, which is one too many for me, but it could be as many as what, 100, 500, 1,000? And I have my tendency to feel a hell of a lot more sorry for a set of confused, isolated, and lonely pubescent girls who have no one to love them enough to help them appreciate who they are.
Oh, here we go. Jordan's getting emotional again. But he's absolutely right. This is why I get so heated when I talk about this. Is these people have no regard for the lives they destroy in the course of their own actions. They have no regard for the tremendous influence they wield, and they say these incredibly destructive, unthoughtful things, and they just do whatever the fuck they want in the public eye with zero regard for the fact that millions of impressionable people, not just kids but adults, but I care a lot more about the kids, they have no regard for what that behavior is going to impress upon children. And that is largely what has led to the destruction of the American family and the American youth over multiple generations. It is reprehensible to me that someone refuses to wield their social power responsibly. It is indistinguishable from evil, in my opinion.
Yeah, which this is slightly unrelated, but it's the same mindset like with, pharmaceutical companies who are like, well, 150,000 deaths is an acceptable number.
Yeah. Yep. To take a biblical slant to it, Turtle, Satan hates us because God loved humans more than he did his angels. And Satan, Lucifer was God's greatest creation until humans. And Satan, Lucifer, regarded that as an insult and hated humans and thought that if he could corrupt humans, he could prove to God that he was better than humans. That is the biblical answer to that question.
Than I do for one overprivileged and unfortunately confused, narcissistic, and lonely pubescent girls who have no one to love them enough to help them appreciate who they are than I do for one overprivileged and unfortunately confused, narcissistic Hollywood star.
Yeah, I feel the same. I mean, I don't particularly want to say anything about Ellen Page. I think you've said it enough. You've said it clearly. No, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say you've said it clearly enough. I would just depersonalize it, and I would say that it's back to the narcissism, the focus on one person at the expense of everybody else. So that's one of the things that's most remarkable about this movement is, there are many people who are suffering or underprivileged or vulnerable or indeed like really, really, really hard done by. Like a colleague of mine once said to me, why are we not talking about the Yazidis? Why are we not talking about child abuse victims? Why is the suffering trans person or the untransitioned trans child the martyr figure of all? And almost a Christ-like
well, that's what we're trying
figure.
to figure out, eh? Yeah.
So, right. And why is it as if to sort out that child's, like the worst thing that's ever happened to anybody, to feel gender dysphoria? I think most people feel gender dysphoria in some respect. Why to sort that out will we sacrifice any number of other people?
Well,
and
it's
be
a form of... it's a form of narcissistic self-consciousness. I mean, and everyone does feel that, for sure. And I think they feel that most acutely at puberty. I mean, people are, well, we know we're mortal, we know our flaws, we know we're going to die, we know we aren't canonical examples of our sex, that we could be much better in 1,000 ways than we are. We all have to bear that burden. And so that dysphoria, that's mortality dysphoria, and it can manifest itself in all sorts of ways. And that's part and parcel of the human condition. But to entice young people into assuming that radical surgical transformation is the sure cure for that is, well, I also believe that it borders on the demonic. I compared the people who were doing transformation surgery on minors to people who sacrifice children to Moloch. And I do see it in exactly the same way. And the weird thing about having done that, you know, this is so strange too, is that almost all the comments I got for that article from the Telegraph and also on my YouTube channel, almost all of them were supportive.
Yeah.
Way more than I thought there would be. And I thought, well, if everyone agrees that this is wrong, why the hell are we doing it?
I mean, false consciousness. People believe that other people don't agree with them. I mean, that is one of the purpose of conversations like this, is to show people that you can actually say these things. And I mean, it hasn't been easy for either you or me, and we have had significant blowback for it.
Let's talk about that. I want to know, like, I know what happened to me.
Yeah.
When you wrote this book, what happened to you?
I mean, not as much as might have, because my employer isn't a coward. So
right.
It turns out that you don't need very much bravery to stand up to these people, because the viciousness gets worse if you give in any way.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That's something that cannot be stressed enough. If you say, go fuck yourself right at the beginning, they go look for another target. I think that's largely why here at Team Adventurous, there hasn't been any massive first of all, because we're not that popular yet. But also because you look at me and you look at how I behave and you instantly realize trying to bully this guy isn't going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
I am a disagreeable, stubborn asshole, and no amount of social pressure will make me do anything that I do not want to do, especially edit my speech to cater to people I find reprehensible.
Yeah. Because, honestly, like on a metaphorical example, they're kind of like that chihuahua that comes into your yard
You've
and
seen
is
that.
all like, all bark and whatever, and all you have to do really is just stomp your foot and act like, hey, no, I'm bigger and scarier than you, because you actually are. They take the hint and run away.
Sometimes. So it depends on whether or not the Chihuahua has actually been met with any consequences during its life. This is the reason why a lot of Chihuahuas are overly aggressive, is because their owners think, oh, he's barking, he's nipping at people, it's so cute.
So cute.
Which is why if the only time I've been attacked and actually damaged by a dog, oh no, wait, that's not true. So one of the 2 times I've been attacked and damaged by a dog, it was a small dog. And the next time I see a small dog run at me and trying to attack me, I'm just going to punt it like a football. And if the owner wants to fight me, okay, I guess I'm fighting the owner now too. But that's how you have to, in this world, that is just the reality. If danger is coming at you full speed, stand your ground and beat the fuck out of it. And it won't be a problem again.
Right.
It's just how it works.
You've seen that if somebody says something and then they apologize, they just come after you with redoubled ferocity. So I don't think that the editor of The Economist agreed with me, at least at first. But she doesn't like bullies, and she does like free speech. And so the first people who tried to get me fired, she told them sharpish where to put it.
Okay, so you had employer support.
Yes, employer support is very important. I often think about what happens to people in this social media age, and in particular those of us who talk on trans issues, but also those who talk on race issues, as being the modern form of the pillory. So you're shamed. You're shamed rather than injured. You're not hanged or crucified. You're specifically shamed. That's the aim, and it's done in a way so as to maximize the fear.
Love the picture you guys chose. first I think about when I look at is Adam and Eve. Also, I can't find any stream close to this one. I can't support you guys. I don't own even a credit card, but you got my truthful prayer. Hey, yeah, your prayers mean a lot, and you clearly have an internet connection. So just sharing us around with people, going and supporting us on every platform we're on, that's more valuable than monetary support. Honestly, is just sharing our content around to your friends, actively engaging with it, because that's good for the algorithm. That is more support than you know. It really is. So
and being here and being lovely in chat, all that stuff. That's also a form of support. We're glad to have you here.
We are glad to have you, indeed.
Yeah.
That other people feel that they will also suffer the same fate. Because there's nothing they can do to help you if you're brought to the pillory. Like if a woman is brought to the pillory, let's just say a woman, because I'm a woman, another woman could go and stand by her to show solidarity, but it wouldn't do her any good. She too would be shamed then. It would just mean that there were two outcasts instead of one. So then you think, like, what do you do to end the pillory? It's not mass solidarity, actually. It's powerful people. If you were under the protection of somebody with social capital, you wouldn't suffer this fate. This was for the outcasts. So it's actually,
to an extent, I don't entirely agree with that. There's a flipping point. There's a flipping point where, okay, one person is standing with this person, they're both pieces of shit. 5 people are standing with this person, all 6 of them are a piece of shit. 100, okay, maybe there's something to this. 1,000, okay, what's going on here? 10,000, oh yeah, that's that person, there's nothing wrong with that. That's how human brains work. It's social proof. And the social proof is a well-documented phenomenon. So I have to disagree with her. If solidarity, if it's universal enough, ends shame. Period.
Yeah.
Which is why the LGBTQ has gotten the level of acceptance it has, because there's been this mass solidarity push in our culture.
Yeah.
The job of employers and institutions to stand up here.
You mean rather than to censor, for example?
Yes, but and you don't have to say very much. Like Kathleen Stockton at university did eventually say some good things about free speech, but she had been going for 3 years and they had said nothing. If the first time they attacked her, the university had said very clearly, we support free speech, we support academic freedom, we do not tolerate attacks on our staff, I guarantee you the mob would have gone elsewhere straight away. Instead, it was made clear that she was available to be brought to the pillory. So I didn't have that.
Okay, so then
They
next
threw her
question
under the
is,
bus.
why do you think, what has changed that has made our institutions so utterly cowardly in the face of the narcissistic minority mob? Because something's changed. It wasn't like this 10 years ago. You could see it a bit. It certainly wasn't like this 20 years ago. So do you think is it fundamentally the power that social media has brought to the obsessively and narcissistically outraged minority? Or what do you think it is?
Yeah, so I think that plays a part. But the thing is, your employer can do the same thing about social media. They can just put out a short statement saying, we stand by Helen Joyce or Kathleen Stock or whoever it is. She's an excellent journalist or she's an excellent academic. Move on. And they move on. They really do move on. So it's the fact that institutions haven't learned to deal with social media. They think they have to engage. I don't know why they do that. It's stupid. I've seen it repeatedly.
Okay, so I have a hypothesis about that.
Right.
Okay.
You tell me what you think of this. Well, look, if you're a conservative type, you tend to be conscientious. And conscientious people tend to be guilt-prone because they want to be seen to do their duty, and they want to do their duty. And so what that means is that if you're a narcissist and a mob of 30 torch-bearing neighbors show up on your doorstep and tell you that you're shameful, you don't care because you're a narcissist. You're low in conscientiousness, you're parasitic, you're disagreeable, you could care less what other people think, and so the mob has no effect on you. But if you're conscientious and 30 people show up, then you're going to think, well, 30 people wouldn't be on my doorstep if I hadn't maybe done something wrong, and I'm not perfect, and so maybe I should scour my conscience and, repent of my sins publicly because, well, why would I presume I'm right when I know I'm imperfect? That works really well on conscientious people. And now with social media networks, a mob from anywhere in the world can aggregate itself. And even if it's one person in a million who's annoyed at you, if 100 million people are watching, then 100 people can show up on your doorstep with torches and pitchforks. And so I think that this guilt targeting that the narcissistic psychopaths use in social media is particularly effective on decent, conservative, traditional people.
And so they need to learn that we're not in Kansas anymore. Things are not the way they were.
Yeah.
You know, if you're prepared for it, if you know it's coming. So I think The Economist, because it's very America-focused, but it's still a very British publication, I think it had a couple of years' notice that things were different. And so when these started, you know, they were prepared, because it's the first thing you do that's catastrophic. If you make a misstep on the very first thing, then it's very hard to regain it, because they know that you'll give way. You've proved it. So they will never leave you alone.
Right.
Yeah, well, I noticed for a while, I've been subscribing to The Economist forever, such a great magazine, and I noticed over the last 6 or 7 years that an alarming degree of wokeness had crept into its hallowed hallways. And then I noticed about 3 years ago that the tide had turned and that people had woken up, so to speak, to some degree at The Economist and started to push back against a fair bit of this nonsense. And I was so relieved about that. And so I don't know if that's commensurate with your experience there, but thank God there are some institutions that still have the ability to stand up and say no, like a firm and caring parent, let's say.
I shouldn't really comment on my own employer, who've been very good to me. So, you know, I still hold fast to some of those older values of discretion and loyalty and so on that are so easy for the modern identitarian narcissist to hijack and to use against you. So I think that's another thing that we're seeing. We're seeing the rise of the toxic underling, I call it in my mind. You know, we all know about what toxic bosses are like. Like, a toxic boss can ruin everybody's experience in an entire workplace. But that's like a right-wing toxicity, and that it's the toxicity that's enabled by authority, chain of command, loyalty, discretion, obedience, you know, these values that are good and bad of the right wing. And now you imagine you've got a toxic underling who's somebody who's completely convinced of their own rightness, who's junior, who's willing to tell any lies in the service of what they see as the greater good, who have no loyalty whatsoever, who think that the institution is irremediably sexist, racist, transphobic, homophobic, everything phobic, and who think that it's their job to fight from the bottom up. And then what I was going to say, the second thing that stands along social media as the enabling factor in all of this is the rise of the DEI industry, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Oh, yes.
And the thing is, if you were living in the old world, if we were still living in Kansas, that would not be too bad. Because yes, okay, we could have some more diversity, that'd be great. You know, equity is not a bad thing in itself, and I don't want to exclude anybody, of course. But we're not in Kansas. We're living in a new world where everything is upside down. And so within that world, DEI is weaponized. And it creates this toxic underling phenomenon whereby just some junior person can cause an entire organization to have a meltdown by claiming, you know, phobias of various sorts and by taking to social media to talk about it. And bosses don't feel like they can say, that's ridiculous, you know, out if you're going to talk about us like that.
You suck.
Hey!
How's it going, Mason?
What,
I saw you said something on Facebook just a second ago. I wasn't sure. Hang on, I'm gonna listen to this really.
Oh, yes. This is number 3 of our. Oh, Kiwi. I love it. Yes, he's not here today. He had to go to a wedding. He said, don't expect it to make sense. Well, don't you know? Not everything has to make sense. It doesn't have to make sense. Adventurous affirmations and context is for pussies. So, yeah.
Oh, Mason, I just listened to your voice messages, Mason. I love you, bro. I hope you're having a great fucking time, dude.
Yeah.
Because if they do, they'll be told that they're racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, everything else.
Right, but you know, but there is an unbelievable amount of self-delusional cowardice
I
in that
love
too.
you too.
Because
Yes.
you can say to those people, there was a rebellion at Penguin Random House when the news came out that they were going to publish my new book.
Oh, I read about it.
Beyond Order. Yeah. And my daughter and I, our response to Penguin was, hey, look, you got 6 or 7 employees here in the greatest publishing house in the world, and they just told you they're perfectly willing to ban books they haven't read, and then have a meltdown about it. Hey, they just told you who you should fire. Why don't you fire them? And the answer was, well, we can't do that. It's like, well, not only can you do that, you are actually morally obliged to do that, because they showed you in the deepest possible way that their values, which were narcissistically sensorial, were at 100%.
All I will say is, you do you. Well, I couldn't be bothered to do anything else, my friend.
Percent odds with yours.
The trick is to not hire those people, like not even to have them come in and prove to you that they should never have been hired. And there have been a few really interesting articles about these meltdowns that I've read in the past few weeks. And there was a sort of just a couple of sentences that were by the by in one of them. And it was a lot of employers, especially in Washington, in the NGO and nonprofit and charitable sector, you know. And they were saying how they can get no work done anymore. Like they just can do nothing.
Well, yeah. Mason, are you drunk texting me in chat right now? Is that's what's happening?
Yes. I think so.
Yep.
The entire organization is tied up in these interminable Slack channel conversations about, you know, how they need to rearrange everything. And they're not actually doing their charitable or their non-profit mission anymore. They've stopped being mission focused at all. And one of them said, we realized belatedly that we have suffered less than some other people because, and he didn't mention who it was, we have someone on staff who a year or 2 ago was caught up in one of these horrendous social media draggings. And so the social justice warriors won't apply to work here. So they were kind of inoculated against it. So I think that's the trick, to work out how you don't hire these people. And I think it's by stating your values really, really clearly. And that those values must be outward facing. They must be to do with your mission. That the mission comes first.
Right.
And that everybody is expected to sign up.
Well, that's also a reflection of the belief in that underlying ontological reality, right? We actually have a job to do.
Yes.
Maybe.
It's a job in the real world, and it's of paramount importance. And if you don't feel like that job is worth doing, then
yes, Mason, I know what Jaeger bombs are. I'm somewhat familiar with the Jaeger, with the bombing of Jaeger. Yeah.
The bombing of the Jaeger.
The bombing of Jaeger.
Yeah.
this isn't the
I
job
have
for you.
I have attended.
All right, well, we're
a few
coming up at the end of our half hour
bombings
or
of
hour and a
Jaeger.
half. I'm going to continue talking about these issues with Helen on the Daily Wire Plus channel. We're going to actually go into the details of the development of her career and expand that into a philosophical discussion. Hello, everyone.
Yep.
I would encourage you to continue listening to my conversation with my guest on dailywireplus.com.